Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Naruto finds a legendary summoning contract. Before I start, please support for more amazing content, and do consider subscribing to my channel and share this video with your friends. This is written by SincereNaruto, and link in description and support writer. Let's start the video. Chapter 1 Nightmares and Loneliness. The constant sound of dripping water echoed throughout a small barren room, slowly hitting the cold damp floor in a harmonious rhythm that tore away at an abandoned heart. A small lonely figure sits quietly on top of his barely tangible bed, gazing out into the night as rain fell past his small window, while shivering in the icy chill of his room. This was the life of Naruto Uzumaki, a young boy who lived in an orphanage near the edge of Konoha, a boy who had been cursed with a life of loneliness and despair. Every night, he would gaze outside of his window, watching as those around him walked down the streets. Laughs and smiles filled the air with their exuberant sounds as happy couples and families passed through Naruto's view, captivating his longing blue eyes with the warmth and happiness he saw in their faces. A happiness he never knew, but one he had always wished to experience. It was all he could do to wait, to pass the time every night until someone finally came to see him. It was always the same. Every evening one of the wardens would come into his room and teach him a lesson about love and comfort in the only form he knew. The only type of contact he ever had outside of the ninja academy he was reluctantly allowed to attend was the brutal impact of fists and makeshift weapons against his small, defenseless body, followed by words of hatred and cruelty. This was his hell, his empty world of broken dreams and lost hope. He never knew why he was hated or tortured, why he was never allowed to play with the other children, or wander outside into the village. Even his room was secluded from the others, occupying an older side of the building that was in a much-needed state of repair. As with any orphanage, happy couples or would-be parents would often visit and sometimes leave with a new child in their care, but Naruto had no such luck. He was never allowed to meet with the adults, never given the chance to have a family and life of his own. Even when he was lucky enough to bump into one of the hopeful parents, the only thing he would receive were their cruel glares and hateful whispers. Why? Why him? Why was it always him? Even at the academy, he was never seen for who he was, only as the prankster that would try to mess up people's lives. But he didn't know any other way to gain attention. He was never taught how to approach others, how to share a proper greeting or receive friendship and kindness. These things were all foreign to him, almost like trying to learn a different language altogether. He had never even received a hug or kiss in his entire life, or even the soft words of love and appreciation that a parent would give their child. The only person who even seemed to acknowledge him at all was one of his teachers at the academy, the one called Iruka. He was the only one who had any interest in Naruto's progress as a growing shinobi and as a pupil. As Naruto's empty eyes lost themselves in the sight of falling rain, the door suddenly began to stir before slowly creaking open. The boy turned around with a small whimper escaping his lips, only to watch in a knowing dread as a large man walked into the room, cracking his knuckles in preparation for the night's lesson. He knew what was going to happen. It was the same thing that happened every evening at the same time. Naruto climbed off his bed and backed away against the cold hard wall, watching with tearful eyes as the brutal figure made his way over to him. But his sobs were only music to his tormentor's ears, and he received no pity or mercy even as his tears fell gently to the ground. Good evening, little Naruto. I suppose you know why I'm here, so we'll skip the introductions and pleasantries. Not that you know anything about that. Naruto closed his eyes as tightly as he could manage, bracing himself against the wall for what was about to happen. All he heard was the cruel snickers of his newest teacher before a shooting pain erupted on the side of his cheek. The blow from the man's fist was so hard that it knocked him straight onto the damp floor. He could feel the blood making its way out of his mouth, tasting the coppery slime before it dripped onto the ground. Naruto gave out a wince of pain as his nerves suddenly fired up around the impacted area, but he still didn't open his eyes regardless of the pain it caused him. He just waited there on the floor hoping he would pass out from the agony and save himself from further torture, but he was not that lucky, never was. Another kick broke into his side soon afterwards, fracturing his ribs with a resounding and very agonizing crack. The sheer amount of pain that erupted through his body finally coerced him to scream out in anguish despite his efforts to hold his obvious pain. The man simply laughed at his cries, almost as though he enjoyed the sounds of Naruto's agony. Yes, that's right. Scream for me, let me hear you cry. It didn't stop there either. The beating continued for the next half hour, interspersed with the sobs and screams from the young blonde boy who endured the cruelty of an unfair punishment. After a while, his anguished cries devolved into strained screeches before eventually subsiding altogether, the boy no longer having the strength to even scream. The only thing that remained, as his fragile body continued to endure the endless punishment, were the tears that poured out from his tightly closed eyes. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of torment, the beating came to a sudden halt, and Naruto slowly began to open his bruised eyes to watch as his assailant walked over to the door, with a smug spring in his step. Looks like we're done for the night. The man snickered, looking back at his handiwork lying in a quiver on the floor. I'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. The man turned again to walk out the door while Naruto desperately tried to pick himself up, supporting his battered body against the nearby bed as he managed to come to his knees. It was over, he had survived another night, But before he was even allowed to finally breathe a painful sigh of relief, the dark figure walked back into the room holding what looked like a wooden stick with pieces of metal teeth jutting out from its surface. I thought I'd leave you one last present for tonight, seeing as how you took that little beating so well. Naruto's eyes widened in horror as the man made his way back to where he knelt on the floor, while his heart began to tense in fear. No, please don't, not anymore. Naruto's sobs and pleas were ignored as the man raised his weapon to strike. He closed his eyes to prepare for the torture once again, but the snickers of his assailant still rung in his ears. No, not anymore and no more. Suddenly, Naruto's eyes shot open again, revealing 2 golden irises in place of his normal blue ones. As he caught the warden's gaze with his panic-stricken eyes, the man suddenly dropped the weapon in his hands and began to violently quiver in fear. Before Naruto could understand what was going on, the man fell onto his back and began to scream in pain, holding his head with his hands and rolling on the floor in anguish. It was almost as though he were being attacked and tortured by an invisible assailant. Naruto's eyes returned to their normal blue shade once more, and he began to push himself up off the floor, not knowing what had just taken place. He quickly stumbled past the squirming warden and out of his room, limping down the hallway as fast as his battered legs could carry him. He could hardly walk with his numerous injuries, but somehow he found the strength to continue, screaming for help as he made his way. Somebody help! I don't know what's happening. As much as Naruto hated what was done to him, he couldn't watch while someone cried out in pain. He couldn't allow anyone to die like that, no matter how cruelly the boy had been treated. Naruto's weakened form eventually collapsed on the ground, his clothes covered in the blood and tears of his nightmare, watching as the world around him became a dark blur. The last thing he saw were 2 high-heeled shoes making their way up to his position, and then nothing. So the little monster's finally done it. I knew this would happen sooner or later. We should have gotten rid of him sooner. The dark world that engulfed Naruto slowly peeled away as the throbbing pain in his head brought him out of unconsciousness. As his eyes opened to reveal the damp, tattered room around him once more, the boy's gaze was met with the visage one of the officials that ran the orphanage whose words had pulled him from the darkness. It was a tall, relatively skinny woman with long blonde hair and cold green eyes. Her gaze was filled with the same cruelty and arrogance as the rest of them, holding the boy in front of them with nothing but ill contempt. This wasn't the first time Naruto had met her. She would often show up after one of Naruto's many accidents, or when he tried to resist a beating. It seems you've caused us a bit of trouble, she began, walking to the side of Naruto's bed. Our dear warden was nearly killed by your little stunt and is currently being taken to Konoha's hospital. The medicine said he would be in a comatose state for at least the next week. Do you have anything to say for yourself? Naruto looked up in both surprise and fear. He didn't intentionally do anything to hurt the man, but he knew he would be blamed and punished nonetheless. Well, Naruto painfully pushed his body up into a sitting position and began to quiver violently with fear, holding back the tears that stung in the corners of his eyes. He knew how cruel this person could be and how much agony he would have to endure by her hands if he didn't choose his words wisely. I don't know what happened, I swear. 1 minute he was standing in front of me and the next he was on the floor, screaming. Enough. I don't know who you think I am or if you just think I'm plain stupid, but this charade has gone on long enough. Naruto watched in fear as the woman marched over to his door, turning back only to finish speaking. The third Hokage may have placed you here out of compassion, but I can no longer allow a monster like you to live in our presence. The woman then walked out of the door, only to be replaced by 2 tall, heavily built men. They made their way over to the panic-stricken boy and hauled him out of his bed, carrying him by his arms down the hallway to the entrance of the building with little regard for his injuries. As they opened the front door, revealing the still pouring rain outside, the 2 men hurled Naruto into the street with what little belongings he had left. Get lost and don't ever bother coming back, monster. The door slammed shut behind Naruto, leaving him in the cold rain under the nighttime sky. He slowly picked himself off the floor despite the pain of his injuries, rubbing his eyes with his arm as the tears began to stream down his face. Tears that were hidden by the rain that soaked his blood-stained shirt, washing away the evidence of his torture. Why did they call me a monster? What did I do to deserve this? He sobbed, slowly making his way down the now empty street. Naruto wandered for what seemed like an eternity, carrying the backpack that held what little clothes he had. At this point in time he was wearing a white, short-sleeved shirt with a Konoha leaf symbol in the center of it, and black pants that fell a few centimeters below his knees. He also had black footwear much like the sandals the other shinobi wore at his academy. The outfits in his bag were pretty much the same, only just spares of what he was already wearing. After finding his way into a secluded alleyway, Naruto sank down next to the nearest dumpster and leaned against its cold hard surface, snuggling against the corner where it met against the wall. This was his home now. The very streets he was never allowed to wander, with all their dangers and hardships, would now be the only place he could return to. Naruto pulled his backpack from his shoulders and pushed it into the corner, using it as a makeshift pillow for the night. Even though his body was soaked with the freezing rain that fell around him, he somehow managed to fall into a deep sleep with only the warmth of his tears to comfort him, passing the rest of the night in loneliness, as he had always done before. Only his momentary shivers showed any signs that the boy was still alive. It was life that was now on the verge of a great change once again. Dawn. As the last few vestiges of rain clouds fell away from the morning sky, the warm, soft rays of the first glimmers of sunlight finally began to pierce down into the village, embracing the small quivering body of a young boy who had somehow managed to survive the icy night. Naruto's battered form began to stir under the warmth of the sun, before stretching out to relieve the pain from the previous night's tortures. He slowly opened his eyes, revealing the still-soaked floors and walls that surrounded him. Naruto sat up and shook his shirt off from the dust and marks that filled it. Its white surface was now covered with black marks, and had half been torn to shreds during his beating. Naruto pulled it off from his back and held it in front of him, looking over its tattered form. He would have to change before heading off to the academy, otherwise everyone there would notice. But as the boy turned to fetch a new shirt out of his bag, his eyes were only met with the empty corner where his belongings had once lain. It had been stolen. He hadn't even been on the streets for more than one night, and all his belongings were already gone. Now he was only left with the clothes on his back, so to speak, and the injuries from those that hated him. Naruto dropped to his knees and began to cry once again, scrunching up the shirt in his hands trying to relieve some of the built-up tension. After a few more minutes of falling tears, he stood up and pulled the tattered piece of clothing over his back again, walking out of the damp alleyway. He didn't want to be late for class at the academy. It was the only place where he could escape from the hell that was his life. The only place where he could find a dream worth holding on to, a dream worth living for. To be a shinobi and find the strength to show those around him the worth of his existence. After a few minutes of walking had passed, Naruto finally found himself in the comforting sight of the academy grounds. As he stepped into the familiar building, he felt all of the pain and fears begin to slowly fall away, replaced instead by a warm, subtle relief. He felt safe here, like no one could hurt him or take away what little was left of his soul. Even though some of the teachers still glared at him with cold, tormenting eyes, none of them had ever dared to confront him or cause him harm. Perhaps it was because of all the numerous shinobi that filled the building, or the watchful eyes of Iruka that had stayed their hands. He knew that it was the third Hokage that insisted he be allowed to train at the academy, so he assumed that any misconduct, especially from the very ninja that served the old man, would be dealt with harshly. Naruto made his way into the classroom where he was taught every day and sat in his usual position facing the blackboard in the front of the room. He was the only one there so far, arriving much earlier than usual. Normally his caretakers at the orphanage would keep him away for as long as possible, not wanting the boy to advance into something that would possibly seek vengeance on them. But now he was finally able to come on his own accord, arriving when it suited him, especially seeing as how he had nothing else worth doing. As he sat there by his desk, Naruto allowed his head to rest on its wooden surface, slowly dozing off into a deep sleep once again. It was amazing that he made it to the academy in the first place considering the exhaustion of his overstressed and battered muscles. After a few more minutes had passed, the shuffling of feet and silent whispers sounded throughout the large room as more academy students began to make their way to their seats. Naruto just remained sleeping, oblivious to the curious stares of his classmates as they moved in around him. Eventually Iruka himself walked into the room, demanding silence from the ruckus that had formed. "Alright class, you should all know by now that tomorrow we're holding another important exam. This one will determine your advancement into the level of the academy where you'll start learning basic combat skills and some jutsu. Those who fail will be kept back and will have to try it again in 6 months. Up until this point in the ninja academy, all students were only taught the bare minimums of ninja combat. The only jutsu that was permitted so far was the replication technique, mostly because it was the safest to use and consumed little chakra for the still developing youngsters." As soon as Iruka had finished explaining, the muffled complaints of the students before him began to reverberate around the room. A young dark-haired kid known as Shikamaru just gave off a troublesome sigh. He had always been lazy in class, and although he knew he'd probably still pass, he was beginning to wonder if it was even worth the effort. His thoughts were soon jarred when his eyes caught sight of a sleeping Naruto in the desk in front of him. "Well, looks like he's going to be staying back another 6 months. He sighed, but then his eyes began to wander over the tattered clothes that covered the boy's back. "I wonder what happened to him. Isn't it obvious?" Shikamaru turned to face the blonde-haired girl that sat beside him. "He's probably been playing some kind of prank again, and just got himself into trouble. Serves him right if you asked me. I'm glad he's not going to pass. At least we'll get rid of him now." Shikamaru gave off another deflated sigh. We don't know if that's the case. Perhaps we should tell Iruka." "Tell him what?" The girl snapped back, stopping him in his tracks. "Yes, what is it you want to tell me?" Both of them turned in surprise as Iruka called out in their direction. He had noticed their idle chatter from a mile away and was beginning to grow irritated by the interruption. "Well, that idiot Naruto is sleeping in class again. He's always going to be a dead last if you asked me." Everyone turned to the said boy as he continued to slumber away, causing Iruka's eye to twitch in frustration. "Oh, that boy is going to give me such a headache." Iruka proceeded to march angrily up the steps to Naruto's row and walked over to his sleeping form. He was just about ready to swat the boy on the back of his head, until he noticed the tattered and torn shirt on his back with the remains of what looked barely visible blood stains. Iruka briefly froze for a moment, before walking up to the boy's side, past the curious Inuzuka that sat next to him, and then placed his hand on Naruto's shoulder. The anger in his eyes quickly fell away and were now replaced with concern and fear. "Naruto, wake up." he murmured with a gulp, shaking the boy's shoulder from side to side. The only response he got was a few muffled laughs from the students around him, as his attempt to wake the slumbering student bore no fruit. He then tried it again, this time shaking the boy more vigorously, desperately trying to break his sleep. After a few tugs, Naruto's eyes suddenly shot open in a yelp of panic, and he swung his arm, lashing out in defense. Iruka, luckily, caught it in mid-flight, avoiding the impending blow. The terrified boy suddenly realized whom it was he lashed out to as he looked up to the shocked man. Iruka-sensei. I'm sorry I didn't. That's all right, Naruto. Iruka looked down at the bruised face in front of him. It was filled with marks and cuts, the same as the small arm he now held in his hand. The boy's eyes were filled with both panic and what looked like guilt, but also the unmistakable traces of fear. Naruto, what happened to you? Naruto's eyes began to water as he continued to look up in silence. But before any tears could fall, someone called out from the back of the class. Yeah, what happened, Dobe? Get run over by a stampede. Or maybe the little prankster got caught with his own medicine. Everyone burst out laughing as the cruel words were thrown in Naruto's direction, and Iruka could only just watch with a heavy cringe as the boy sprang up from his desk, before running out the room, covering his face in shame and to hide his falling tears. Alright, that's enough, everyone. I don't want to hear another word from any of you or it will be detention for a week, got it? Everyone became silent at Iruka's outburst. None of them had ever seen so much anger in his eyes before now. The Chunin then ran out the room to find his student, leaving the stunned class behind him. After wandering the hallways in desperation, trying to search for Naruto, Iruka finally found his way outside into the academy playground, the only place he hadn't looked so far. There, sitting alone on a swing, was the blonde boy he was searching for, crying his eyes out as he calmly rocked back and forth in a gentle sway. Iruka simply took a deep, nervous gulp and then cautiously made his way over to the empty seat beside him. Naruto was somewhat startled by his arrival, but quickly calmed down again soon afterwards, never once speaking a word to ward him away or even grate him. There was a moment of awkward silence between the two, interrupted only by the soft sobs coming from the younger boy, before the older Chunin finally spoke in a gentle whisper, saying the only thoughts that he could put into words at the time. They heard you, didn't they? Naruto gave off another deep, heavy sob, as if to confirm his teacher's suspicions. Iruka then moved off his swing and knelt in front of the boy, gaining his eyes in a locked gaze. They were filled with so much pain and suffering, more so than he had ever seen before, and it was enough to cause his heart to sink just looking into such ensorrowed gaze. Iruka then placed his arms around Naruto and pulled him into an embrace for the first time in the boy's life, allowing him to sob on his shoulders, releasing the anguish he felt inside. Naruto flinched slightly at the sudden motion, his body tightening up defensively as the foreign exchange was initiated. Iruka-sensei, what are you doing? The boy stammered uneasily, unable to discern the situation he now found himself in. Iruka simply squeezed even tighter, pulling Naruto even closer to him and holding him as gently as possible. What do you mean? I'm giving you a hug. It's what people do for someone they care about when they are sad or in pain. Naruto's eyes widened at that, but the tears in his eyes only grew even more. Soon his head was buried completely into his teacher's shoulders as his sobs continued to shake his body, while he allowed the warm comfort of their embrace to soothe him. Iruka just continued to hold him closely as he let out all of his emotions, knowing full well that it was all he could do for the boy at this point. That's right, just let it all out, he whispered gently, stroking Naruto's back in an effort to ease his shaking. I won't let go until you are ready. Something strange began to happen at that point. For some unexplained reason, Iruka began to feel his own emotions stir inside, almost as though the pain Naruto was feeling made its way into his teacher's heart as well. Shinobi at Chunin level or above, especially academy teachers, had received extensive training to keep their emotions in check at all times, but Iruka knew he had no control over what he was feeling now. It felt the same as when someone forced their chakra into another person's body, only this time his feelings were shared as well. Iruka tried to brush off the strange emotions, setting them aside to concentrate on the boy in his arms. He could think on the matter later. After a few more minutes of crying, the Chunin finally allowed himself to pull away from Naruto, allowing him a moment to wipe away his tears before sharing in the boy's gaze once again. He noticed a small glimmer of gold shining in the Naruto's otherwise cerulean eyes, but brushed it off as the reflection of the morning sunlight. Are you feeling a bit better now? Naruto nodded his head slightly in answer for lack of any better response. After all, he was feeling a bit better. He was still shaking a lot though, something Iruka noticed easily and with a great deal of discomfort. Look, Naruto, I'll talk to the third and see if we can resolve this issue with the orphanage once and for all. Naruto just shook his head in silent disapproval. It doesn't matter anymore. They kicked me out last night. I have nowhere to live anymore. Iruka's eyes dropped at the sound of his student's words. What happened? Why did they kick you out? He mumbled. Naruto thought long and hard about what happened, trying to sort through the blotchy memories as best he could, before finally responding. I'm not really sure. They said it was something about me putting one of the wardens in a coma. I think they mean he's sleeping and he can't wake up. You see, while he was beating me up something happened. What? Iruka growled, his eyes growing infuriated at what he had just heard. He quickly stood to his feet and began to storm off. When I get my hands on those filthy bastards, I'm gonna. Naruto grabbed Iruka's hand before he could move far. Don't, Iruka-sensei. I don't want to hurt him any more than I already have. Besides, it will just get me into more trouble, even though I don't actually know what really happened. Iruka was almost taken aback by how Naruto could be so kind and forgiving even when he was treated so cruelly. But the boy's pleading eyes won over in the end. Alright, let me take you out for ramen. We'll talk over at Ichiraka's and you can explain everything that happened. Naruto gave a silent nod of approval, before wiping the tears from his face once more. He then stood up from the swing and allowed himself to be led of the field by his sensei's hand. Iruka didn't even go back to the class to explain what was going on. At this point in time, Naruto was the only one he was concerned about. What could a 10-year-old academy student do to put a grown man in hospital so easily? And what was the sudden sensation he felt when hugging the boy? He would have to find out what he could and talk to the Hokage about this new development. But first, he would have to get Naruto some new clothes and check his wounds. Chapter 2 Iruka's Analysis. The immensely inviting smell of freshly cooked food gently teased the nose of an excited young boy as he and his sensei made their way to Ichiraka's ramen stand. Naruto and Iruka had spent much of the day wandering around Konoha, first visiting the hospital to check up on the boy's numerous wounds. While they were there, the Chunin's frustrations grew to unequaled levels when the nurses refused to give the boy anything more than a simple overview, almost completely ignoring the bruises and cuts clearly visible on his face and arms. After some persuasion, however, they were soon checking the boy's muscles and organs more thoroughly. It pained Iruka greatly when he received the diagnostics report on the Naruto's condition. Apparently the youngster had received multiple fractures and lacerations throughout his body, and the sheer amount of punctured arteries and bruised muscles tissue was frightening. The fact that Naruto was even able to walk at all was surprising, much less anything else. Iruka silently considered breaking his promise to the boy about not harming those at the orphanage. In fact, he knew a few certain somebodies who could make their lives a living hell. One Ibiki Marino came to mind as a possible tool for vengeance, although the sadistic temptress that was Anko Mitarashi wasn't a bad idea either. Luckily for Naruto and for Iruka's failing heart, none of his internal organs were too severely damaged, and it seemed as though, much to the Chunin's surprise, Naruto's wounds were also healing at a remarkably rapid rate. The boy was given the okay for the time being and the two then made their way to their next stop. The second task for the day was to shop for new clothing for the young trainee. It was painfully clear to Iruka that Naruto didn't have a single possession left in the world to call his own other than the clothes he was already wearing, so it wasn't surprising how happy he felt when he saw the youngster's face light up with glee as he tried on some new outfits. At first, Naruto seemed to be very shy and even a little afraid. It was obvious that no one had ever gone out of their way to care for the boy and make sure he received the things he needed, so he was not used to the kind gesture. But after a few words of encouragement and understanding from Iruka, Naruto finally let go of his unease and allowed himself to accept this precious gift from the only one that seemed to care for him. Now Iruka wasn't exactly a fashion guru, but he seemed quite concerned when the now increasingly bubbling child came out of the change rooms wearing a bright orange and navy blue jumpsuit. After a carefully conceived explanation about how a ninja needs to remain hidden at all times, he finally managed to convince the blonde that it was an unwise choice of colors. Naruto seemed to accept his explanation that brighter isn't always better with careful consideration and decided to stick with his usual white shirt and black pants combo. He always did like those two colors, even though he never had a choice in the matter before now. When they went to the till to pay the bills, the Chunin couldn't help but notice the growing evidence of tears that had formed in the corners of Naruto's eyes, and the excited smile etched brightly on his whiskered face. He also began to notice the same golden tinge that he had seen earlier that day, only this time there was no sun to blame it on. He had a bit of trouble with the lady behind the counter, much like he had with the nurses in the hospital, but once again his unusually persuasive demeanor won over in the end, and he managed to get out of the store with his wallet relatively intact. After a busy day of shopping and hospital checkups, and a quick change of clothes, they finally went to lunch as Iruka had promised earlier that morning, which is how they now found themselves here at Ichiraka's. As they entered into the street-side store, the mouth-watering smells of steaming ramen instantly caught Naruto in its enrapturing trance. The old man at the counter greeted them with a warm, hearty welcome, introducing himself as Tucci and smiling at the sight of his new young customer. Naruto had never been treated to anything like this in his life before, so it wasn't surprising to see the sense of wonder and excitement smeared across his otherwise bruised face. So, what will it be for the young master today? Naruto's face shot into a bright grin as the two of them sat in front of the counter, the boy doing very little to hide his obvious excitement. Iruka handed him a nearby menu and let him read it for himself while he looked over his own. Naruto stared at the words with a great deal of concentration, moving his mouth as he looked through each line. It was almost as though the mere act of reading took a great deal of effort on his part. Iruka watched on with knotted stomach as the boy's face grew into a discomforting frown. Iruka-sensei, he finally mumbled, turning to his teacher with shame-filled eyes. I can't understand what it says. The Chunin felt his heart plummet at the sound of Naruto's words. Just what the hell were they doing at the orphanage if the boy couldn't even read properly? No wonder he was struggling so much at the academy. How could he not have seen this sooner? Alright, don't worry about it, Naruto. Let me help you there. Iruka leaned over to the distressed pupil beside him and began to recite the menu's contents, helping the boy decipher the words for himself as well as gently correcting his mistakes. After a few minutes of sitting there working it out, and a few curious stares from their host, Naruto finally looked up to the old man Tucci and called out his order. I'll have 1 bowl of miso ramen. Iruka then quickly leaned over and whispered into his ear again. After giving of a small nod, Naruto rephrased his words. Can I have 1 bowl of miso ramen please? The last word was emphasized with an odd smile from Naruto's part, and the old man just grinned in response, as if to silently approve his well-mannered request. Of course you can, little one. What can I get for our other guest? Oh, I'll just have 1 bowl of pork ramen please. Iruka responded just as politely. Tucci smiled in approval once more and then turned to see to their meals, but just before he made his way to the back of the stand he caught sight of the bruises around Naruto's eyes, which he had only just noticed despite the boy's efforts to hide them from view. What happened to you, little one? Looks like you've been roughed up a bit, he gulped uneasily, gazing intently at the soiled face before him. Iruka opened his mouth to answer the man's question, but Naruto quickly cut him off before he could speak. Oh that. Well you see I just got into a fight at school, that's all. Nothing to worry about. Tucci still seemed somewhat uneasy, but the old man's face seemed to relax a bit at the boy's explanation, before he once again turned to get their food. As he walked to the back of the store, he called out to Naruto once more. I hope you showed the other kid not to mess with you again. You bet ya! Naruto grinned in reply, trying to sound as reassuring and as genuine as possible. But as Iruka continued to gaze at him, he noticed the boy's face fall back into a frown soon afterwards, clearly betraying the truth of the matter to anyone who might have seen his expression. It must have hurt for him to have to lie like that, just to keep those around him from worrying. Iruka thought quietly to himself. The man then began to wonder just how many times Naruto had done the same with him in the past, and he silently cursed himself for his own negligence on the matter. He couldn't help but feel guilty about the way Naruto had been treated and the fact that he had never really taken notice of it before. After a few more minutes had passed by, 2 steaming bowls of ramen were placed in front of the 2 waiting guests. Iruka shot Naruto off another small glance, to which the boy gave a polite thank you to the store owner. The Chunin then followed with his own thank you and they both got stuck into their meals. It seemed as though the useless bags of meat at the orphanage hadn't taught the boy anything about proper manners or etiquette either, and his lack of reading skills showed their neglect more than anything else. Another thing that shocked the Chunin watching over him was how fast Naruto seemed to shoot through his meal, gulping it down at an alarming rate as though he hadn't eaten in days. It wasn't long before the bottom of the bowl became visible through the pool of soup that remained behind, which Naruto promptly finished off with a satisfied gulp as he drank it down. That was the best food ever, Iruka-sensei. The boy boasted happily, slapping a grin on his messy face as he emptied the bowl and placed it back down on the table. Iruka giggled at the sight of his ramen-filled cheeks and his warm smile. It almost completely hid away the bruises and marks that covered him almost. The man then picked up a nearby serviette and rubbed Naruto's face clean, extracting a small giggle from the ticklish endeavor as the cloth brushed up against his whisker marks. The Chunin's face then brought on to a more serious expression. So Naruto, what exactly did they feed you at the orphanage anyway? Naruto's eyes lost their glimmer once again as the memories of that horrid place filled his mind, something that made Iruka almost immediately regret his question. Well, sometimes they would just give me leftovers after everyone else had finished their own food. That was if I was lucky. The rest of the time I just got moldy bread that was already a week old. Iruka felt his stomach knot sickeningly once more, almost opting him to lose the food he had just eaten moments before. Oh yes, he would definitely be talking to Anko, there was no doubt about it. Ibiki could torture what was left of them after she satisfied herself with their screams. Revenge would be sweet indeed. But before Iruka could delve any deeper into his sadistic thoughts, Naruto called out for his attention again. Iruka-sensei, can I have another bowl please? The Chunin gave off a warm smile and nodded in approval, much to the boy's obvious glee. Iruka was starting to wonder if bringing Naruto to lunch was such a good idea after all. 8 bowls of downed ramen later, he found himself checking his wallet to make sure he had enough money to pay the ever-growing bill. But seeing the glow on Naruto's face erased all doubts from his mind. It was all definitely worth all the trouble. He had never seen Naruto so happy before, like a child smiling on his birthday after receiving the gift he had always been waiting for. It was disturbing how so simple an act could bring the boy so much pleasure. After a few more minutes and 2 more bowls of ramen, Naruto patted his stomach in satisfaction and once again thanked their host. Now that their meal was finally over, Iruka took the presented opportunity to ask Naruto about the events of the previous night. So Naruto, you were going to tell me what happened, with the warden at the orphanage. Naruto gave out a deflated sigh and scratched the back of his head in thought. Well, it's like I was telling you. That big man came into my room and started to beat me up. It happened every night, so I wasn't really surprised to see him. But that still doesn't make it any easier, Iruka nodded his head in quiet understanding as the boy spoke, gently coaxing him into continuing. So, when I thought he was finally finished with me, he walked out of the room to leave, but then he just came back again and with this thing in his hand that he was going to torture me with, and I guess I kinda freaked out. After that, when I looked into his eyes, he started going crazy, falling on the ground and screaming. Naruto's tone began to sink into a near whisper as he continued. It looked painful. Like he was being tortured or something. The boy then paused for a brief moment, pushing back the stinging sensation that had suddenly began to burn in his eyes before finally finishing. Anyway, that's when they threw me out onto the streets and told me to never go back. Naruto released a heavy sigh, desperately trying to relieve his built-up tension in any way he could manage. Iruka simply drew his hand up onto his chin in thought, trying to put all the pieces of Naruto's story together and decipher what had happened. From what he could tell of Naruto's description, the man that had attacked him seemed to suffer from the effects of some sort of genjutsu, but Naruto had never mentioned forming any of the hand signs that were essential to casting one. Besides, the young shinobi in training hadn't even managed to master the Bunshin no Jutsu, much less a jutsu that required extremely precise chakra control beyond that of most academy students. The only other thing that could explain what happened was if it was cast by the effects of a Dijitsu, which would explain why the warden only reacted after looking into Naruto's eyes. There was only one problem though. Dijitsu were only found actively as rare bloodline traits among specific clans, and the only two bloodlines in Konoha that contained them were the Uchiha's Sharingan and the Higa's Byakugan. The latter couldn't cast any known genjutsu, which only left the Sharingan as a possibility. Iruka knew that Naruto wasn't an Uchiha and there were no other known great Dijitsus, other than a rumored fable, which could explain this phenomenon. There were minor examples of lesser Dijitsus known throughout the world, but those normally came about after members of the greater clans broke away and watered down their bloodline with mixed breeding. Even still, none of those Sedai techniques could ever cast a genjutsu of the magnitude as the one Naruto had described. Not to mention there was still the matter of Naruto's contact with him at the academy. The feelings Iruka had conjured back then were definitely not his own, and he suspected Naruto's physical touch had something to do with it. Naruto, did you notice anything odd when you looked into the man's eyes? You know, like anything out of the ordinary. Naruto gave some thought to his sensei's question before answering. Yeah, things did seem to look a little different. When I looked at him, it was like everything was clear to me, clearer than they've ever been before. It was almost as though I could see inside of him, you know, all the feelings and the pain. He seemed sad almost, like he had lost someone close to him long ago. Iruka nodded his head in thought. Everything Naruto described sounded like the effects a Dijitsu might grant. Normally those who wield their power are given an enhanced perception of the world around them. The Byakugan gave the Hyuga the ability to observe their surroundings in a 360-degree radius without any obstruction, and it also allowed them to see another person's chakra, flow and tenketsu points. The Sharingan allowed its users to read another person's taijutsu, genjutsu and ninjutsu without fault, and also allowed them to counter or copy such techniques accordingly. Both of those examples, however, were more physical manifestations of enhanced perception. What Naruto described was something else entirely. The Chunin brushed off his thoughts on the matter for the time being and stood from his chair, before handing over the bill to their grateful host and walking Naruto back into the street. He was deeply troubled by the intriguing puzzle he had stumbled upon, but he also knew that he would not be able to find any answers on his own. He would have to see the Hokage and explain the situation as soon as possible. Alright Naruto, thanks for telling me everything you know. I realize that it must have been hard to repeat all of that, but I promise I'll try to figure out what's going on. Naruto gave a solemn nod as the two made their way down the dusty street, and then looked up to his sensei with grateful eyes. Iruka-sensei, why are you doing all of this for me? I mean, all my life everyone else has just treated me like dirt. It's like they think I'm a monster or something, but you're so nice and kind. And the boy's eyes then began to swell up with tears again, but he desperately tried to push them back away from view. This only prompted his teacher to put his arm around Naruto's shoulder before pulling the boy closer to his side and holding him tightly. The Chunin began to feel his emotions stir once again as he embraced the boy once more, forcing him to push back the tears that suddenly stung at the back of his own eyes. Naruto, I don't know how to explain the actions of others, but I do know that what they did to you was wrong. No one deserves to be treated like you were, no matter what people think they see in them. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? Naruto simply nodded in understanding. Thanks Iruka-sensei. Iruka then ruffled up the boy's hair a bit, gaining another quivering chuckle from the blonde as his tears slowly dried away. Good, now, let's go see the old man and get this matter resolved once and for all. With that, the two made their way over to the Hokage Tower, walking closely in one another's comfort. Iruka would be damned if someone attempted to harm the boy on their way. Heaven help the poor soul who tried to take advantage of such an innocent child. The cruel stares of the villagers around him were only met with Iruka's own murderous glare, and the amount of killing intent that radiated off the protective father figure was unnatural for the usually kind soul that was Iruka. He only hoped that Naruto hadn't noticed what was happening around him. Naruto's own body, however, began to quiver in fear much to Iruka's painful discomfort. His anger and frustration quickly fell away again only to be replaced by concern. The strange thing was that as soon as Iruka let go of his tensed emotions, Naruto's quivering began to lessen as well and abruptly ended altogether. It was almost as though his reaction was caused by the Chunin's own feelings at the time. Iruka simply brushed off his curiosity on the matter for the time being and willfully refocused on their task. The two of them entered into the front entrance of their destination soon afterwards, and walked down the busy hallway to the room in which the third resided. As soon as they arrived at the said door, the ANBU immediately greeted the Chunin. Iruka-san, you're here. Hokage-sama has been waiting for you too. He told us to let you inside as soon as you arrived. Iruka's face immediately filled with surprise and confusion. The Hokage was expecting us? But he quickly shook it off and bowed politely as the ANBU opened the door. The two of them then walked inside with the frightened Naruto still under Iruka's arms, who never let go of the boy once as they made their way to stand in front of the most powerful figure in Konoha. The said man looked up from his paperwork and gave off a relieved smile. Ah, Iruka, I'm glad you could make it. The old man's eyes then resettled onto the boy hiding under Iruka's arm, who flinched slightly under his gaze. And I see you've brought Naruto with you too. That is good. Iruka quickly gave a respectful bow and then prompted Naruto to do the same. Lord Hokage, you were expecting us? The old man grinned at the obvious confusion on the Chunin's face. Naruto looked equally baffled and a little bit intimidated by his presence as well, but a quick flash of a warm smile from the old man quickly erased some of the boy's fears. Well, when I heard about the orphanage kicking Naruto out because of him hospitalizing one of their wardens, I naturally became concerned. Then I received a report from the academy that one of my best teachers just upped and left a class unattended. It didn't take long for me to put two and two together, so I knew I would be seeing both of you soon. Iruka seemed to blush in embarrassment. I shouldn't have left like that, my apologies. There's no need to apologize, Sarutobi cut him off. I can understand your concern and have already explained the likely situation to the academy officials. So now, what is it that you wanted to speak to me about? Iruka prompted Naruto forward, nudging him closer to the desk at which Sarutobi sat. Naruto, can you please tell the Hokage everything you've explained to me so far? Naruto took a deep gulp and after a few reassuring squeezes on his shoulder from Iruka, he began to relate the story of the previous night once again. The third seemed to react in a similar manner as Iruka had, nodding his head in silent understanding as Naruto explained and questioning him every so often. After another daunting retake on the terrible events that had transpired the night before, Naruto finally finished with a wavering sigh and a well-hidden sob. So, that's how it happened, the Sandaime sighed, pushing into the back of his chair. Naruto, I would kindly ask that you step outside for a moment so that your sensei and I can speak about this matter. Naruto nodded reluctantly, not wanting to leave the protection of the only one who had willingly cared for him. He then slowly headed out the door, leaving his two seniors to their privacy. Once he had closed the door behind him, Sarutobi returned his attention to Iruka once more. So Iruka, judging by the look on your face, I'm sure you have come up with your own theory about what happened last night. The Chunin nodded in confirmation. Yes, that is correct. I suspect that the warden fell into a genjutsu of Naruto's making, but we both know that academy students of his level don't have the chakra control to handle such advanced techniques. Sarutobi took a puff from his newly lit pipe, allowing the taste of flavored tobacco leaves to linger on top of his tongue for a few moments before releasing it with a deep sigh. Do you think the nine-tailed fox has something to do with this? Iruka shook his head, much to the aging Hokage's relief. No. From what I can tell by Naruto's explanation, as well as my own observations of the boy's behavior, I suspect an advanced bloodline may be involved. Sarutobi's eyes widened in surprise at that, his intrigue now reaching new levels altogether. An advanced bloodline, you say? He asked curiously. Yes, I suspect it may be a Jujutsu-related bloodline of some sort, although I've also noticed a strange sensation when coming into physical contact with Naruto as well. The only problem is, I haven't heard of any other Jujutsus outside of the Sharingan, Byakugan and Rinnegan, and the third one is only rumored to exist as a legend. The Hokage then stood from his desk and walked over to where the Iruka was situated. Just because we haven't discovered something yet, doesn't mean it isn't there. There are many hidden bloodlines that we still don't know about. Entire generations of clans have often passed in and out of existence without anyone ever learning their secrets. So it is a possibility for Naruto to hold such heritage as well. I will get Kurenai to have a look at the boy. If this was indeed a genjutsu of some sort, she may be able to uncover how it was executed. In the meantime, I want you to prepare Naruto for his return to the orphanage. I expect. What? Iruka cut him off abruptly. Are you really going to send him back there after what they did to him? How can you even think that? Sarutobi shot Iruka a deadly glance, instantly silencing his protests in their tracks. Iruka, I know how you feel about this matter and I understand your concern, but I won't have Naruto living on the streets. It's simply too dangerous for a young boy his age, especially considering his status and the hatred directed towards him. As much as I hate it as well, there is simply no one else in the village that will take on the boy and I cannot force another family to care for him. It is the only place I can keep him under some form of surveillance. I'll try to keep tabs on him for safety reasons, but we have no other. No! Iruka interrupted once more. We do have another choice. I can't allow Naruto to live on the streets either, but I won't see him back at the very orphanage that made his life a misery in the first place. It will tear him apart, having to go back there after all these years of torture at their hands. The Hokage raised his eyebrows curiously, wondering what it was that Iruka had planned for the boy. The Chunin's eyes quickly hardened their gaze thereafter, clearly displaying his newly formed resolve as well as the iron will that had now settled into his heart. He had made his decision, he knew what he had to do. Naruto, he can live with me. I'll take care of him from now onwards. Chapter 3: A New Home. The bitter, invigorating smell of burning tobacco drifted around the office of the third Hokage as the old man pulled another deep draw from his smoldering pipe. He slowly rocked into the back of his chair, allowing his tired thoughts to run through the disturbing conversation he just had with Iruka. The old man knew how the minds of people worked, and also what they were capable of, and there were a few things that troubled him about what he had just learned. For one thing, the potential discovery of a new bloodline in Naruto Uzumaki could have dramatic consequences for the young boy's life. If anyone learned that he contained such a bloodline, many would call for the boy's death, fearing what he may use it to achieve. Some may even seek to use him for their own purposes or try to incorporate him into their own clan's bloodline as well. Neither one of these events boded well for someone so young and vulnerable, especially after everything he had been through already. Add to that the fact that he was also the sole container for the very monster that almost destroyed their village, and you have a recipe for disaster. It was a grave situation indeed. It was highly likely that word of the hospitalized warden would leak into the village, causing panic amongst its occupants, as well as more nightmares for Naruto. There was nothing the old man could do to prevent it from happening, no matter how many procedures he put into place to stop it. Even though the laws that kept Naruto's identity as the container for the monster fox had been honored, people still found a way to get to the boy where it hurt the most. Nothing the Sandaime said or did would change that fact. Sarutobi could only pray that Iruka knew what he was doing by taking on such a burdened soul. The Chunin's own life would now be in danger as well if anyone sought to harm Naruto. Sarutobi slowly pulled himself up from his desk and walked over to the nearby window, looking out over the entire village as the last remnants of sunlight slowly faded from existence to make way for the night sky. He knew the academy was holding an assessment exam the next day to see which students would be allowed to advance into the next stage of shinobi training, and he wasn't sure if Naruto was in the right emotional state to complete it. If what Iruka had told him was correct, the neglect he received his entire life so far had a massive effect on his schooling as well as his relationships with those around him, the latter of which he didn't have until the recently forged one with Iruka. It had only been a few minutes since the two had left the tower, but he could already feel his stomach knotting in discomfort. As the cool night sky slowly descended over the village of Konoha, two pairs of shuffling feet slowly made their way down her relatively empty streets, wandering almost aimlessly in silence. Naruto wanted to ask Iruka what he had spoken to the Hokage about, but he knew that it was probably for the better that he didn't know straight away. The boy allowed his thoughts to wander on everything that had happened that day, from his first hug with Iruka to the precious gifts he had received on the man's behalf. His life had taken a turn for the unexpected and he wasn't quite sure what to make of it now. On one hand, he was now free from the prison that was his orphanage, finally free from cruelty and beatings that he was forced to endure every night. However, on the other hand, he would now be forced to endure a different kind of danger altogether in the lonely darkness of Konoha's streets. He would now have to learn to survive on his own, learn to endure the cold weather and harsh elements with nothing more than the clothes on his back to protect him. The young boy looked up to the darkening sky only to shudder in discomfort, noticing the rain clouds that had already begun to gather over the village. Well, it looks like I'm gonna get wet again tonight. He sighed, looking back down to the dusty path beneath him. Naruto began to mentally prepare himself for the long night ahead. At least he wouldn't be beaten anymore. The rain was a small evil to suffer if it meant saving himself from the pain of the cruel wardens. Iruka's eyes soon wandered over at the slouching form beside him, and he quickly placed a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder, stopping Naruto in his tracks before stepping out, in front of the blonde. Naruto's eyes locked with his sensei's face, filled with surprise and curiosity as the man crouched down in front of him. Iruka-sensei, what's wrong? Why are we stopping? If you want to go now, I understand. Iruka took a deep breath in preparation for what was about to happen and then looked into Naruto's blue stare, searching inside his heart for the words he needed to say. Naruto, I don't want to see you living on the streets anymore. It's just not right that a kid like you should have to stay out in the cold. I've decided, well, actually I wanted to know if you'd like to live with me? Naruto's eyes widened in complete shock at the sound of what he just heard. He felt his heart plummet in his chest as he tried to digest exactly what Iruka meant by that. Inside his normally blue orbs, a glimmering shine of gold momentarily flashed back at his Chunin sensei. Iruka, noticing his surprise, quickly continued to explain. The third Hokage has already given me permission to take you in. I just need your permission first. So, what do you say? As Iruka's hand continued to squeeze the surprised boy's shoulder, he began to feel his emotions stir once again. Except this time he didn't feel any pain, fear or sadness. This time he felt warmth, like a sudden glimmer of sunlight had brushed against his body, gently caressing his soul in its promising warmth and light. He also felt a bit of uncertainty, as though Naruto's mind was trying to tell him that this was too good to be true. Iruka-sensei, do you really mean that? See, can I really come live with you? The Chunin nodded with a warm smile, which quickly prompted the boy into tears. But why? Why would you do that for me? No one else ever wanted me, so why? Iruka took another deep breath before explaining. The truth is, Naruto, that you've become an important person to me as well. I cannot watch as one of my precious students lives a life of pain and loneliness anymore. I would be happy to have you in my house. Before the man could finish his sentence, Naruto threw his arms around his sensei, squeezing as tightly as his small quivering body could manage. The surprised Chunin took a moment to gather himself from the sudden burst of emotions he felt coming through Naruto's touch, and began to return the hug with all the love and warmth he could muster. "I'll take that as a yes then?" Naruto just silently nodded on his shoulders while the tears continued to stream from his eyes, being unable to find any other words to express himself in his failing voice. However, words were no longer necessary. Iruka could already feel what was going through his heart. The pain and grief he felt earlier that day was now replaced with a sudden spurt of warmth and appreciation unlike that he had ever experienced before. "Oh Naruto, I just wish I could have seen what was happening sooner. I could have stopped it before it went too far, but now I'm going to do everything I can to fix that mistake." Naruto didn't want to let go of the embrace, he didn't want to leave the comforting arms of his sensei, even as the small trickles of rain slowly began to form around them, gently caressing their bodies with their cool, massaging tingle. After a few minutes of warm embrace, Iruka reluctantly pulled out of the hug and locked gaze with the boy's tearful eyes once again. "I think we should hurry home, we don't want you catching a cold now, do we?" Naruto nodded silently, still unable to find his voice, only this time with a newly reformed smile spread clearly across his face. He then gently took hold of Iruka's outstretched hand with his own small fingers, squeezing tightly in the fear of letting go. The light drizzle that tickled against them soon grew into a heavy downpour as the two proceeded to run through the streets as fast as their feet could carry them, desperately trying to avoid getting soaked as they made their way from cover to cover. Naruto seemed to be lost in the excitement of all his emotions, and the seemingly fun game they were playing. The boy even managed a few joyful chuckles every time they quickly sprinted through a small stretch of rain to the nearest shelter, slowly inching their way closer to home. That's when it hit Naruto. Home, he was finally going to have a home. It was something the boy had always dreamed about during his hellish days that spent in his prison. He would always watch as one of the other children made their way out of the orphanage with new parents holding their hands, wishing that someday someone would find it in their hearts to come and save him from his nightmare. Now, all his prayers were finally coming true, and the tears of joy and that found their way into Naruto's eyes were only hidden by the rain that gently washed over his face. After a short while, the two finally arrived at a house that sat further down on the outskirts of the village, removed slightly from the other cluttered buildings that crowded the rest of Konoha. It was Iruka's family home, once belonging to his parents before they tragically died. It even had a small garden surrounding it, neatly closed by a low-standing wooden fence. Naruto, however, didn't really have time to admire the exterior of his new home as he was quickly rushed up to its entrance. Iruka grabbed a key from his pocket and proceeded to unlock the door, flashing a quick smile down towards the excited boy beside him. He then opened the entrance and turned on the light, revealing the inviting interior for his pupil to see. Naruto felt his heart leap into his throat as his eyes wandered around the spacious interior. He had never been so excited in all his life. He just wanted to burst into the room and explore every inch of the house. But before the boy could even move, Iruka prompted him into taking his muddy footwear off at the doorway. The Chunin sensei helped Naruto undo his black sandals and then took his hand to show him around the house. He could feel the rush of emotions running through his own body as Naruto looked with amazement into each room, first exploring the living area and then the kitchen and bathrooms. The house was decently sized for all intents and purposes, sporting 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a living area, a kitchen and even a small study. Although it was by no means a mansion, it had the makings of a nice family home, which it most certainly was at one point in the past. After a few more gasps of wonder, and some unintentional squeezes from Naruto's hand, Iruka finally led the boy into one of the larger bedrooms. "This is my room," he murmured softly, watching as Naruto's eyes explored the walls and floor around him. "It used to be my parents before they died a few years ago." Naruto's eyes rose up to meet his sensei's, noticing the way Iruka's own gaze seemed to fall into a blank stare as the memories of his parents began to revisit him once more. The Chunin quickly shook off those feelings, however, when he noticed Naruto's growing discomfort. Well, I guess I should show you your... Was it hard?" Naruto cut him off. Iruka scratched his head in confusion, trying to decipher the boy's question. "You know, when your mom and dad died, it must have been really sad." Iruka didn't know what to say or how to explain it. He just continued to stare at the longing blue eyes that locked in his gaze. There was a brief moment of silence before Naruto turned his head to face the ground again, speaking once again in a near whisper. "I never knew my mom and dad, but I always wondered what they were like. I always imagined them being kind and loving, like the ones I used to watch walking down the side of the street by my room. In my dreams, they would be holding me in their arms and telling me how proud they were to have me as their son." Iruka began to notice the tears falling down the side of Naruto's cheeks, but he didn't have to see them to know what Naruto was feeling inside. The boy let out a few drawn-out sobs and then looked back up again, meeting Iruka's gaze once more. "If I ever had the chance to meet my dad, I'd have wanted him to be just like you, Iruka-sensei." The Chunin felt his heart disappear into his stomach as his eyes widened in surprise. He gave off a warm, grateful grin that was soon matched by Naruto's own growing smile. "Come," Iruka whispered softly. "There's one more thing I need to show you." He then led Naruto out of his room and down the hallway once again. After taking a few steps further towards their destination, they arrived at one last door that Naruto hadn't seen yet. Iruka then let go of the boy's hand and placed his own hand on Naruto's back, urging him forward. Go ahead, open it. Naruto took a deep gulp and then placed his hand on the doorknob. He gently turned it and heard a click as it opened, revealing the interior inside. Naruto slowly entered into the room to see a small bed standing in the left-hand corner next to a large window. There was also a wooden shelf next to it, and some cupboards on the wall to his right. Iruka followed in behind him and put his hands on the boy's shoulders, gently squeezing them as they stood there in silence. This used to be my room when I was just a boy. I have so many fond memories in this very place. Now it belongs to you, Naruto. Naruto felt a warm sensation fill in his heart as he looked over his new room. He slowly made his way up to the bed in front of him and ran his fingers through the soft blankets that covered its surface. It was nothing like the cold, damp, tattered prison he used to live in at the orphanage. It felt safe and warm, like he had always imagined a real home would be. Iruka himself couldn't help but smile as Naruto jumped up onto his bed, letting his feet dangle off the side as they playfully swayed back and forth underneath him. The boy then looked back up to his sensei and boasted the biggest grin he could muster, playfully bouncing up and down on the soft mattress he sat on. It was then that Iruka noticed that the bruises that once circled his eyes were now barely visible under the warm, artificial light that bathed them. The Chunin walked up to Naruto and knelt down in front of him, inspecting his whiskered face with a smile and then sighing in relief. So, what do you think? Like your new home? Naruto's answer came in a wordless form as he leapt from the bed and into Iruka's arms, almost toppling over the stunned Chunin. Naruto's excited chuckle was muffled out as he dug his head into Iruka's shoulder, and soon the boy was once again allowing himself to happily sob in the man's arms. He still couldn't believe what was happening, still wondering if it was just a cruel dream sent to torture him as he slept next to a dumpster, but somehow he knew it was real. For the first time in his life, Naruto felt like he had the family that he always wanted. Thanks, Dad. He mumbled as his body shook with brief sobs. When he felt Iruka jump slightly, he realized what he had just said and quickly pulled away from the hug. Iruka-sensei, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Iruka put his finger on the boy's lips to silence him and smiled warmly. He then placed his hand on the boy's cheek and gently stroked it. It's alright, Naruto. If you really want to, I don't mind if you call me Dad. Naruto pulled back slightly, leaving the reach of Iruka's hand. I don't think I should. I mean, you've already done so much for me already. I don't want to make you do something for me that you can't. Although it pained Naruto inside, he could feel Iruka's discomfort when he mentioned the word Dad. He knew he couldn't ask Iruka to be his father if the Chunin wasn't ready for that. Maybe he would never be ready. Iruka just nodded uncomfortably in understanding and then stood up to his feet once more. I'll go and get us both some dinner. Why don't you get a feel for your new room in the meantime? Naruto silently nodded in approval and watched as Iruka made his way out the door, before gently closing it behind him. The boy then walked over to his bed and jumped up onto its surface again, before looking out the window as the rain continued to fall outside. Iruka slowly made his way towards the kitchen, desperately trying to shake off the terrible guilt he now felt pulling at his heart. The boy wanted a family so desperately that he called his sensei Dad without even realizing it. It pained Iruka to even think about the loneliness Naruto must have endured all his life to have brought him into such a desperate need for acceptance. At least the Chunin had the memories of his parents to comfort him and keep him going. Naruto had nothing except for a desperate dream. The only memories he had were those filled with pain and sadness, and he could not turn to them for comfort. Only his dreams of the future gave the boy any hope, a future that Iruka wasn't sure he could grant Naruto, as much as he wanted to see him happy. The boy was so desperate to find a father figure to hold on to, a role model that he could follow after and look up to, and Iruka simply didn't know if he was the right person to fill that important role. The man willed himself out of his negative thoughts and set some water to the boil, while pouring 2 sachets of noodle soup into a cup for him and Naruto. Once the kettle gave off its sharp whistle, signifying that it had come to a boil, he poured the hot water into the mixture, and then carried it off to Naruto's room. Naruto was sitting quietly on his bed with his legs huddled up against his chest, watching outside the window as the rain continued to fall past it in an endless downpour. It was the same thing he used to do when he was living at the orphanage, and with it came a sudden sense of overwhelming dread. He couldn't help but feel a sickening fear filling his body up with a paralyzing tension. Every night one of the wardens would come into his room and beat him. Every night he would scream out with pain as he drowned in his own blood and tears. Right up until last night, that had been his life, his hell, his reality, and now he couldn't help but feel like it was going to happen all over again. He was so used to it happening by now, that the boy half expected someone to walk through the door right at that moment and start torturing him. Just then, as if to taunt his fears, the door began to slowly creak open. Naruto instinctively jumped up from his bed and quickly stood against the wall as he had always done before, cringing in fear as 2 feet slowly stepped inside. When Iruka finally came into view, Naruto felt his heart drop and he began to quiver violently. Iruka caught sight of the boy's panicked eyes as he pressed himself against the hard surface behind him, while he whimpered silently in his fears. And Naruto, what's wrong? Naruto's quivering legs gave way underneath him and he collapsed to the floor in tears, prompting Iruka to quickly place the warm cups of noodle soup down and rush to his side. As he crouched down next to Naruto, he put his hand out to grab him, but the boy quickly pulled away with a panicked yelp. No, I don't want to be hurt anymore, please don't hurt me, Naruto yelled, sinking his face into his knees. Iruka moved closer again and placed his hand on Naruto's back, gently stroking it in reassurance. Naruto, I'm not going to hurt you. No one is going to hurt you anymore, you're safe now. I won't let anything happen to you. Naruto rocked back and forth in his sobs, his quivers slowly lessening as Iruka's hand rubbed against his back. It was almost as though he could feel his sensei's sincerity, because very soon he was desperately holding on to the Chunin once more. Iruka gently swayed from side to side as Naruto rested in his arms, desperately trying to calm his nerves. After the worst of it was over, he picked the quivering boy up from the floor and placed him on his bed before walking over to the shelf to fetch the soup. He walked back to the bed and sat down at its side, handing Naruto his own cup. Here, have some of this. It will help make you feel better. Naruto held the soup in his shaking hands and gave himself a moment to calm down, slowly sipping at the warm broth to help ease his nerves. After a few more agonizing moments had passed and a few more spoken words of reassurance from Iruka, the boy finally regained his grip on reality. His quivering began to lessen, and his tears were pressed back into his eyes. Iruka looked at him with a saddened expression, one that hid the excruciating amount of fury he held inside. He was almost afraid to touch the boy again, not wanting to pass his hateful emotions onto the already tortured soul. If it weren't for the fact that he was hosting an exam the next day, the Chunin would have been leading an entire squadron of sadistic, murderous ninja over to that damned orphanage. Surely Anko knew some friends that were just as psychotic as she was, or at least halfway there. The Chunin once again had to brush off his plots for revenge as Naruto finished slurping down his soup. The boy gave another murmured thank you before Iruka took his cup from his hands. This was going to be more difficult than he originally thought. Naruto had a lot of emotional scars to work through and they weren't just going to disappear overnight. Iruka would have to be there for him every step of the way if he was ever going to recover properly and live a decently normal life. He only hoped it wasn't too late for the boy to find the kind of happiness he yearned for so desperately. The man walked off to the kitchen and placed the dirty cups into the sink. He then made his way back into Naruto's room to find the boy already covered under his blankets, facing out the window again as he lay on his side. The Chunin walked over to the boy and sat on his bed once more. He then began to gently stroke Naruto's back, trying to search for any emotions that would tell him what the boy was feeling. Much to Iruka's relief, it seemed that's exactly what he felt relief. Having reassured himself of Naruto's stability, he began to pick himself up to leave for his own bed for the night. But before he could move, Naruto quietly called out to him, "Iruka-sensei, do you think the exam tomorrow will be hard?" Iruka gave out a deep sigh. At least the boy's mind was now on something other than that blasted orphanage. "I'm not sure how difficult it's going to be, but I do know that you need to get some sleep if you want to do well." Naruto nodded his head in understanding and then whispered one more time, "Iruka-sensei, if you don't mind, please can you wait here until I fall asleep?" Iruka placed his hand reassuringly on Naruto's shoulder, squeezing it gently. "Sure thing, kiddo." Luckily for Iruka, it didn't take long before exhaustion had its way with Naruto, quickly pulling him into the trance of a deep sleep. Once the Chunin could see his breathing steady, he gave a muffled yawn of his own, signifying his increasing exhaustion. Who ever thought that looking after a kid could be so tiring? Iruka then carefully got up from Naruto's side, making sure not to wake the boy in his movements, and made his way back to his own room, gently closing the door behind him once more on his way out. Once he was finally able to reach the comfort of his own bed, Iruka found that he could hardly sleep at all. There were too many discomforting thoughts flowing through his mind, and they were all definitely about Naruto. The third Hokage was going to send Kurenai to inspect the boy, but Iruka wasn't sure how cooperative Naruto would be with a complete stranger. Another thing that bothered him was the fact that bloodlines are often only activated when their holder is subject to severe emotional distress or physical pain. He just hoped that Genjutsu Master wouldn't subject Naruto to any more stress in order to uncover his secrets. Iruka tried to brush off his feeling and inner turmoil and closed his eyes to sleep. It was going to be a big day tomorrow, and he had to be well prepared for the coming exam. Chapter 4 Examination Day. As the early morning sunlight slowly began to once again pierce through the last remnants of rain clouds, its gentle caress slowly brushed against the whiskered face of a quietly sleeping boy. Naruto stirred beneath the warm embrace that met his face, shuffling slowly under his blankets, and pulling them up to cover his eyes from the brightness of the light's glow. He didn't want to wake up just yet. He didn't want to leave the soft comfort of his newfound bed. Naruto had never slept so well in his life before, and all he wanted was to let the moment last for as long as possible. Back at the orphanage, the damp sheets that covered his battered body barely protected him from the cold night air that whispered over his exposed skin, and the bed he slept on was hardly suitable lion with its failing rigid structure. However, that was no longer the case at all, not anymore. This bed was soft and warm, unlike anything he had ever felt before, and Naruto was content to just lie there in comfort forever. Unfortunately for this young boy, fate had a way of turning things around on Naruto, and very soon his bedroom door sprang open, rather loudly, to let a very cheery Iruka inside. "Good morning, Naruto. It's time to wake up and get ready for school. We've got a big day ahead of us and we don't want to be late." Naruto just grumbled a chain of incoherent words under the muffling fabric of his blanket before shifting once more, still hiding beneath its warm, comforting hold. Iruka just rolled his eyes in response to the obvious defiance, and let out an amused sigh, before walking over to the boy's bed. He then sat down next to Naruto and pulled the top of the blanket down to expose his contorting face, almost allowing a brief, stifled laugh to escape his lips as the amusing sight met his eyes. Naruto, however, simply cringed in the ensuing light, and quickly covered his eyes with his arms in an effort to hide himself from the sun's waking gaze. Just a few more minutes, Iruka-sensei, he mumbled tiredly, trying to pull the blankets up over himself again. Iruka shook his head at the boy's efforts, but still could not help the warm smile that spread across his lips. Naruto, you do remember it's the day of your exam, don't you? We wouldn't want you to be late now, would we? Naruto wearily opened his eyes again and let out a deflated sigh, scowling as he folded his arms in defeat. Alright, fine, I'll get up now. Iruka's smile widened even more as he watched the boy reluctantly pick himself up off the bed, before rubbing his eyes in an effort to remove the fatigue that seemed to latch onto his vision. The Chunin's gaze then moved over to quickly search his body for any signs of injury, and much to his delight, Naruto didn't show any more marks from the abuse he had endured. He's healed pretty quickly, in fact it's unnatural how fast his wounds have recovered, but I am just happy to see him finally getting better. Once Naruto was finally on his feet again, the two then stumbled out of the room and into the hallway. Iruka then turned to look down at the youngster standing next to him, before rubbing the boy's hair affectionately and eliciting a brief smile for his efforts. Alright, I'll fix us some breakfast while you go and clean yourself up. You know where the bathroom is, right? Naruto gave a sleepy nod and then stumbled down the hallway into one of the said rooms, before closing the door behind him, after which Iruka went on his own way. Once inside the bathroom, Naruto slowly removed his clothes and stepped into the shower, before turning on the tap to allow the water's flow to begin caressing his body. At first, he just stood there for a while, allowing the warm, invigorating spray to wash away the last remnants of his fatigue and revive his tired muscles. He was not used to the luxury of warm water, and he couldn't help but get absorbed into a trance by the sensations he was experiencing. As he stood there, enjoying the tingling sensation brushing up against his skin, as well as the reviving heat that filed his muscles, Naruto slowly began to inspect his body, trying to search for the cuts and bruises he had received during his warden's last visit. Much to his surprise and relief, there were no more marks on his body, and the wounds he received seemed to have completely disappeared. After one more overview, the boy then placed his hands against his ribs, before gently pushing against them to feel for any discomfort. But there was no shooting pain to be felt, and the fractures he had sustained seemed to have disappeared altogether. This was all a little bit confusing for Naruto. He wasn't sure how he could be fine after just a single day of recovery, but he quickly brushed off his thoughts on the matter. Right now, he had an exam to prepare for, and it would do little good if he were late for class. After washing himself off and cleaning up, Naruto jumped out of the shower with a renewed vigor and wrapped himself up in a towel. He quickly darted across the hallway and over to his room once again. Once he was inside, he then proceeded to search through his cupboards and got dressed in the new clothes that Iruka had brought for him, which now filled his wardrobe to the brim. Once he was done, he turned around once more, ready to make his way out where Iruka was preparing their breakfast, but before he made it to the door, something caught his attention, bringing his eyes down to the wooden floor that met at his feet. There, sitting at the base of his bed, were Naruto's now clean black sandals waiting neatly positioned for him to put on. Iruka had obviously washed the mud off of them from the previous night's trip through the rain, and had gotten them ready for Naruto to wear. The boy simply let out a heartfelt sigh and smiled at the sight of all the effort given for his sake, and he couldn't help the sudden warmth that filled his heart. He never had someone to look after him like this before. No one would ever go out of their way to make sure he had what he needed, and the overwhelming sense of joy that rushed through his chest could not be described in words. Naruto promised himself to give his sensei a big hug when he saw him again, that much the man deserved in the least. After strapping on his sandals, Naruto walked out of his room and down towards the kitchen, where the tantalizing smells of cooked food began to draw him into an excited trance. As he entered inside the warm sunlit room, his eyes caught gaze of his sensei, who was still slaving over a heated stove. Naruto slowly crept across the open space that separated the two and snuck up behind the man, before finally throwing his arms around his waist and squeezing as tightly as his strength could manage. The Chunin jumped in surprise from his sudden touch and the emotions he had felt rushing into him, almost burning himself on the stove in the process. But he quickly recovered once he realized who it was. "Hey, what's this all about?" he smiled, turning to look down at the brightly smiling face below him. "Oh, I just wanted to say thank you for everything you're doing for me," Naruto replied sheepishly. Iruka turned around in the boy's arms and then ruffled his hair, gaining another excited giggle from the blonde as he did so. He could feel all of Naruto's happiness flowing through into his own body, and it was a comforting emotion for the Chunin to experience coming from the youngster. "Alright kiddo, go and sit down at the table in the meantime. Breakfast will be ready in a few moments." Naruto did as his sensei ordered and hopped over to the nearest chair before plunking himself down and waiting in eager anticipation, teased by the invigorating smells of Iruka's obviously proficient cooking. If it was anything like the food he had the previous day, it would be heaven all over again. After a few more minutes had passed, Iruka walked up to the table carrying a tray in his hand. He placed it down on the wooden surface and handed Naruto his breakfast, as well as a glass of milk for the boy to drink. By most standards it was a nicely prepared meal, consisting of a few rice cakes, some dumplings and warm buttered toast, but to Naruto, however, it was extraordinary. After so many years of stale bread and cold leftovers, this breakfast was as spectacular a meal as the boy could ever imagine, and the excited grin on his face was evidence enough to betray his obvious excitement. Iruka simply watched on with a glowing smile as Naruto hastily gulped down the tasty morsels of food, pausing only to wash it down with an exhausted sip from his milk. The boy's face was once again filled with small scraps of food as he finished his meal with a hearty grin. After downing of the last of his milk and wiping his face clean with a cloth, he helped Iruka clean up the table and took his dishes to the sink. If this was how it was going to be every morning, Naruto was definitely looking forward to a life in his new home. It was the simple everyday pleasures that most people take for granted that filled the empty hole in Naruto's tortured heart. Once the two finished washing the dishes, sharing a few playful splashes between them in the process, Iruka helped Naruto put on his backpack and place the boy's lunchbox snugly inside. The two then made their way out of the house and headed towards the academy, walking past the bustling stores and workshops that littered the side of the road. As they slowly walked down the dusty streets of Konoha, a few convicting glances were spared in their direction. Naruto, having noticed some of the shallow eyes that held him in their glare, slowly inched himself closer to Iruka, who in turn placed his hand around the boy's shoulder to shield him from their gaze. Luckily for Naruto, it didn't take long before they found themselves stumbling upon the relative safety of the academy grounds. The blonde took a deep breath and then let out a heavy sigh of relief, feeling his tension melt away from his body. A few more curious stares were pointed at the two as Iruka walked to his classroom with Naruto under his arm, followed by whispers in between the other students that filled the hallways. Iruka wasn't bothered by any of that, but the feelings flowing from the boy beside him told the Chunin that Naruto was growing uncomfortable. It was made even worse when they actually walked into the room in which his fellow classmates were waiting. The curious glares almost overwhelmed the boy completely as he made his way out of Iruka's protective shield and up to his usual seat. After a few more passing whispers amongst the other students, Iruka cleared his throat to call for silence, and then sat at his desk. "You're a bit late, Iruka, what kept you?" Iruka looked over to see the friendly face of Mizuki grinning smugly back at him, who was already sitting in a chair beside him, waiting for the Chunin's arrival. The silver-haired instructor was to be his assistant during the course of the exam, helping to observe the students in case of any infringements, and to offer his own advice when necessary. Iruka shared a brief smile with the man who he had long considered to be a friend and then turned to face his class. "I had a few things to take care of this morning. Besides, we're still waiting for word on the topic of today's jutsu test, so we still have time to spare." "Oh, didn't you hear, Iruka?" Mizuki retorted, slouching into the back of his chair. "Today's exam is a written test. I've already received the papers, so we can begin immediately." Iruka felt his heart plummet at the sound of Mizuki's words. This was big trouble. Naruto could hardly even read properly, much less write anything. How on earth would he stand a chance of passing? The scarred Chunin watched on with a heavy heart as Mizuki stood from his chair and proceeded to hand out the exam papers to the students. As the silver-haired Chunin passed Naruto's seat, he could see the sudden alarm etched onto the boy's panicked face. He even noticed the same flash of gold in his eyes that seemed to appear whenever Naruto was in a state of emotional distress. He just wished he could just go over and squeeze Naruto's shoulder in reassurance, and tell him everything would be alright. But the Chunin had to remain at his desk throughout the remainder of the test. Once Mizuki was done with his allotted task, he walked back down and sat next to his counterpart once more. He then looked up at the clock on the wall and waited for the right time. Once its hour hand reached 8, he called out to the class, "Begin!" Naruto picked up his pencil at the sound of the academy instructor's signal and began to look over the paper set in front of him. He desperately tried to make out the sentences etched on its white surface, moving his lips as his eyes scanned over each line. But as hard as the boy tried, he could only recognize a few of the shorter words in between. Naruto's hand began to quiver in fear as he moved on to the next question, trying to find anything he would have a hope of understanding. Even if he could get just a few of the questions right, it may be enough for the boy to pass. But much like the last one, Naruto couldn't make out what it said. His face began to cringe in frustration. He couldn't allow himself to fail now. Being a shinobi was the only dream he had left, and that dream was about to be dragged through the mud once again, just like the boy who held onto it so desperately. It almost seemed as though the world wanted Naruto to fail, to fall to his knees and admit defeat even when he finally thought things were getting better. Iruka's gaze was firmly locked onto the young boy as his body tightened in desperation. He could see the pain and frustration in Naruto's blue eyes, and he couldn't help but feel an anguish not forming in his own stomach at the mere sight of his distress. Mizuki noticed the Chunin's intensely focused gaze and looked to share in his view. After recognizing the object of his concern, the silver-haired Chunin closed his eyes and supported his chin on top of his hands. "He looks nervous, doesn't he?" the man mumbled, shaking Iruka out of his trance. "It's almost like he's completely lost and doesn't know what to do with himself." Iruka just bowed his head in silent defeat, as if to confirm Mizuki's growing suspicions, while praying for the 2 hours to pass by quickly so that this nightmarish torture could end. "You don't know the half of it." After that, the rest of the times was spent in silence between the two, as they waited for the test to end. Naruto had just about looked through the entire paper that was set out to him, and he still hadn't found a single question he could answer. The amount of frustration that grew in the boy's heart was soon flooded out with sadness and grief. Tears of both anger and frustration began to form in his eyes despite his efforts to hold them back, ones that he desperately tried to hide despite himself. But before long they began leaking down the side of his face and onto the white sheet that locked in his gaze. The hand that held his pencil was now trembling violently as he desperately tried to compose himself and remain calm. He couldn't allow the others to see him cry. It was like he was admitting he was a failure, giving in to all their taunts and name-calling that he had endured for so long. Maybe they were right, maybe I am just a failure, Naruto thought quietly to himself. As much as he tried to hold back his tears, his emotions soon got the better of him, and soon he was just sitting there, staring blankly at the increasingly soaked sheet of paper that barred him from his dreams. Time. As Mizuki called out for the end of the examination that marked the next chapter in the academy students' lives as shinobi in training, each of the youngsters began to make their way from their desks and out of the classroom once more. A few fleeting glances were spared in Naruto's direction as the other kids walked down to the front of the class and out the door, but the boy just sat there quietly despite it, frozen in his seat, while the fresh tears still clung onto his whiskered face. I'll leave the rest to you then, Iruka-san, Mizuki huffed calmly, before rising up from his seat. Besides, it looks like he may need some help. The Chunin then made his way out the classroom, leaving a highly concerned Iruka behind to collect the exams for marking. The man didn't move for a while as the class fell into a sudden silence. He just sat there, watching as his student continued to quiver and sob in his chair, with his heavy breaths being the only noise to break the deadly quiet that had enraptured them both. After a few fleeting moments and a deeply anguished sigh on his part, he finally got up from his desk and walked up to Naruto's seat. As he made his way up to the boy's side, he noticed the paper beneath him had been completely soaked in his tears, its blank pages devoid of any writing. Iruka took hold of Naruto's quivering hand soon afterwards and gently removed the pencil from his unrelenting grip. The sheer amount of sadness and grief he could feel emanating from the boy's touch at that very moment was almost too overwhelming for the Chunin to bear. Iruka himself wondered how a boy his age could deal with so much pain inside his heart for so long. But the answer was one he didn't want to think about, and in truth he realized that Naruto had not managed at all. Naruto was simply a mess, nothing more than a defeated, shattered heart that was in great need of mending. That much was certainly true. He had been broken by the years of isolation and abuse that he had endured at the hands of his caretakers, and his own self-belief was now dangerously close to being destroyed, completely. It was only then, in that very moment, that Iruka finally began to understand just how much damage had really been done as he continued to feel the remorse flow into his touch. After allowing Naruto a few more moments to himself, Iruka carefully retrieved the tear-filled paper from the boy's desk and then knelt down beside him, before placing his hand on the youngster's shoulder. The silent words that fell from Naruto's lips soon after were riddled in his heavy breaths and wavering sobs. I just couldn't do it, Iruka-sensei. I couldn't. Naruto's eyes never once wandered from his desk, even as he mumbled quietly. It was almost as though he were still trying to read the words inscribed on the paper, as if still trying to decipher their meaning. Iruka felt his heart skip a beat as the heavy words pierced into his soul. It was so painful to see Naruto like this, but he had to do what he could to comfort the boy. Naruto, it's alright. You did your best, and that's all that matters. I promise I'll help you learn everything you need to know, and then we can try again in 6 months. I'll fix this, I promise. Naruto slowly turned to meet his sensei's gaze, only for the Chunin to notice the slight shimmer of gold once again reflect his eyes. Shortly afterwards, the boy leapt from his seat and into Iruka's arms, who quickly caught hold of him and squeezed him tightly in an effort to soothe his heavy breaths. The Chunin simply allowed Naruto's tears to fall on his shoulders, while simultaneously trying his best to ignore the overwhelming emotions that now forced themselves into his body. He tried desperately to hold his own feelings in check, to find the strength to comfort the boy in his arms, but no matter how much he struggled, he could no longer restrain the raw emotions that pushed into his heart. Soon, he could feel the soft trickle of tears fall down the side of his own cheeks, tears that he didn't even know he had shed until that moment. He knew that the tears that fell from the corners of his eyes were not his own, knowing instead they belonged to the boy in his arms, but Iruka allowed them to flow nonetheless. Even if he could only carry a small amount of Naruto's burden, he would gladly accept if it meant he could help the young boy deal with his pain. Sometimes the best medicine one could be offered was the most difficult to swallow, and crying, letting all the pain out through shed tears, was one such medicine for a broken heart. The sounds of laughter and excitement filled the small playground of the academy grounds as a young boy slowly made his way over to the nearby swing. Naruto sat on top of its small wooden frame and gently rocked himself back and forth, watching his feet as they dangled limply beneath his soulless body. Iruka had stayed behind to collect the remaining tests in the classroom, and had also since made his way to hand in the papers for marking, so Naruto was left alone in the safety of the academy playgrounds to wait until he was done. The boy almost felt lost without the father figure he had come to rely on around to protect and comfort him. Although he had been alone all these years so far, it felt like a part of his own soul had embedded itself in Iruka, and now that he wasn't there, the boy felt more vulnerable than ever before. The cruel eyes that continued to stare at him coldly in the distance, despite his efforts to hide himself from their icy gaze, began to tear away at him even more until he began to feel his heart tighten in anguish under the pressure of their gaze. The boy felt like what little spirit was left in him would now be snuffed out, but before it became completely overwhelming, a lone figure suddenly moved to sit quietly beside him. Naruto's gaze carefully shifted to his side in an effort to catch a glance of his new visitor, but to his relief, his gaze settled on a friendly-looking Mizuki, who was smiling gently in his direction. The silver-haired Chunin began to rock his swing as well, until his motions matched Naruto's own swaying rhythm. So, I guess the exam was a little tough, wasn't it? He finally began, breaking the silence that had reigned only moments before. Naruto simply cringed in agony at the mere mention of the test. He didn't want to even think about that now. Mizuki easily noticed his negative reaction, as well as the heavy sigh that followed, and frowned down at the youngster across from him. That bad, huh? Naruto simply nodded in response. I didn't even answer a single question. I guess I'm just useless as a shinobi and as a human being. Maybe those guys at the orphanage were right to treat me like they did. Maybe I'm nothing but a pile of useless. Mizuki suddenly whipped around in front of Naruto and placed his hand on the boy's mouth, halting his words before he could continue. Don't ever say such things about yourself, he offered gently. You were just scared, that's all. Lots of people become afraid when they're facing something they aren't sure about, but a true shinobi must rise in the face of adversity and learn from his failures. Otherwise they will never grow strong. Mizuki then took his hand off the surprised boy's mouth and flashed another reassuring smile. Naruto regarded the Chunin's words carefully, and then allowed a subtle smile of his own to show. It seemed those few gentle words had won Mizuki the boy's trust, and the man quickly took advantage of the given opportunity to speak once more. You know there is a way that you can still pass the test. Naruto's eyes widened in surprise at the academy instructor's words. Seeing that he now had the boy's undivided attention, Mizuki quickly continued with his explanation, hiding the barely noticeable, satisfied grin that crept across his lips. It's going to be tough to pull off, but I assure you if you can do this they'll have no choice but to let you advance. Naruto quickly jumped off the swing in his excitement, almost stumbling in the process, all too eager to hear what the Chunin would propose. What is it, Mizuki-sensei? Tell me what I need to do. Mizuki let off a sly grin and then leaned in over to the boy's ear to whisper his plan. Alright, this is what you need to do, but tell no one, not even Iruka-sensei. After the brief recess had ended, the academy's students slowly made their way back to their classrooms while Iruka sat in his desk, waiting patiently for the seats in front of him to fill once more. Once there were no more children entering through the door, he looked over his students' faces to make sure everyone was accounted for, but there was a certain blood missing from his gaze. The Chunin's heart began to sink in fear when he realized that Naruto still hadn't arrived yet. Has anyone seen Naruto? He asked calmly, searching the faces in the room for an answer. One of the children called out from the back of the class. Yeah, I saw him. He was running out of the academy grounds just before our break ended. He's probably just gonna play another prank again like always. Before the boy could even hope to finish his explanation, Iruka was already sprinting out of the door, hurrying to the playground where Naruto had last been seen. After desperately every inch of the open field, the panicked Chunin left the academy grounds and searched around the rest of Konoha for the young boy. He just hoped that Naruto, in his current mental state, wouldn't do anything rash to put himself in danger. Iruka searched everywhere he could think of to find Naruto, but there was still no sign of the boy to be seen. None of the villagers he questioned were being helpful either, only snickering at the mention of the Naruto's name. Iruka even passed by the orphanage to see if he had returned there, fearful that the boy would subject himself to their tortures once more because of his feeling of inadequacy. But there was no sign of him anywhere. After desperately searching for hours on end, exploring every inch of the village, the sun eventually descended below the horizon, making way for the cold night sky. The scarred man was about to lose all hope of finding Naruto, stopping on one of the rooftops to catch his breath, until Mizuki suddenly appeared before him with a panicked look on his face. Irukai-san, thank goodness I finally found you. Lord Hokage has an urgent message. Naruto has stolen the scroll of sealing and left the village with it in his possession. The scarred Chunin felt his heart drop as the words reached his ears and filled his mind. If what Mizuki said was true, then it was a grave situation indeed. There was only one other place Naruto might have gone to, especially if he was trying to hide. It was a secluded area, but one that Iruka himself often wandered to after he had lost his parents. The Chunin gave a grateful nod to Mizuki and then took off across the rooftops, praying with all his heart that his hunch was correct. Naruto felt like his heart was going to explode as he finally collapsed next to an old abandoned shed on the far side of the village. Carrying the giant scroll Mizuki had instructed him to acquire had been far more difficult than he would have expected, and the mere effort of doing so had fatigued him greatly. However, the boy still managed to smile triumphantly despite his exhaustion, and after allowing himself a moment to regain his breath, he carefully removed the large scroll that he carried on his back and let out a relieved sigh. Somehow, against all possible odds, he had managed to slip out of the Hokage Tower with his prize firmly in his grasp without so much as a single witness to see his actions. Naruto could feel his chest swelling with what could be described as pride, knowing that most shinobi would have been caught attempting such a dangerous feat, but he quickly pushed away his feelings and set out to his next task. The boy quickly opened the scroll, allowing it to carefully unravel on the ground, and then began to read the first technique. Kaji Bunshiram, Bunshin no Jutsu. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. The boy cringed in frustration as he tried to grasp the words written inside. He finally managed to make out the name of the technique, but when he tried to read the instructions, his mind became lost once more. His eyes slowly made their way over each sentence time and time again, desperately trying to remember the meaning of each symbol, but after a few more failed attempts, he sank to the ground in defeat. Why can't I just get it? Why can't I ever do anything? Iruka continued to make his way to his destination as fast as his tired muscles would allow, finally arriving at the cluster of trees that bordered a small forest at the end of the village. After traveling for a few more minutes after entering into the secluded area, he finally caught sight of the small clearing that jutted out from the dense growth that surrounded it, as well as the wooden shed that marked its center. There, in the middle of the open expanse, right next to the small structure, was the slouching form of a young blonde boy, kneeling on the earth with his face embedded firmly in his cupped hands. Iruka gave out a long-due sigh of relief as he realized that he had finally found Naruto, and then proceeded into the clearing, landing next to where the missing student knelt. Naruto made no effort to move from his despite the sudden commotion, so Iruka motioned to place his hands on the youngster's shoulder to earn his attention, as well as the wavering and clearly upset blue eyes that moved to meet his gaze. Naruto's brows furrowed slightly into a frown once he realized who it was that had found him, and the unmistakable look of disappointment was clearly noticeable in his expression. Iruka-sensei, I couldn't do it. I tried so hard, but I just couldn't read it. Iruka knelt down beside the boy and locked into his desperate gaze, somewhat confused by the shaky words that fell from Naruto's mouth. Naruto, what are you talking about? Why did you take the scroll of sealing from the Hokage Tower? Don't you know how dangerous it is? Naruto simply wiped his eyes of the emotions that had gathered in them, and then moved to close the mentioned scroll once more, before fixing its bindings back into place. He then looked back up to his sensei and let out a deep sigh. Mizuki-sensei told me that if I learned a technique from this scroll, that the academy would let me pass the exam. I tried my best to do it, but I just couldn't. Iruka's eyes widened in surprise at the explanation, and he felt his heart sinken as a sudden realization struck him. Mizuki told you that? The Chunin quickly shot back to his feet again not a second later, pulling Naruto up of the ground as well at the same time. Naruto, we need to get out of here quickly. Before the Iruka could finish, a sudden whistling sound erupted from the nearby trees. The scarred Chunin quickly spun around and slammed his palm into Naruto's chest and sent the boy hurtling to the ground just before a wave of kunai flew into his own body, pinning him up against the nearby wooden shed. So that's how it is, Mizuki. The scarred Chunin quickly looked up to see the said man standing on a nearby tree. Ha! Iruka, it seems as though you're getting soft. The man sneered boastfully. Allowing such a simple attack to take you by surprise? I must say I'm rather disappointed, but still, I'm glad you managed to lead me straight to Naruto. Naruto simply looked between the two Chunin in complete confusion, trying to discern what exactly was happening. What's going on? Why are you attacking Iruka-sensei? Mizuki managed a dark chuckle in response to the boy's alarm, amused by the ramblings of the innocent mind he had so easily manipulated. Don't you get it, brat? Are you really that naive? The only reason I asked you to get the scroll was so that I could take it for myself. Of course the village would readily blame you for its disappearance, especially considering the truth about what you really are. Naruto looked over to his sensei in his confusion, hoping that the man would make sense of Mizuki's words. Iruka-sensei, what does he mean? What is he talking about? Don't listen to him, Naruto. The man cried desperately. He's just trying to. Oh, stop, Iruka. Mizuki cut him off. We both know the truth about what happened those 10 years ago. That stupid rule can't protect Naruto forever. The said boy became even more confused than before. What are you talking about? What rule? By now, Naruto's panic had escalated to the point of becoming overwhelming, and his heart now throbbed painfully in his chest. He didn't know what was going on, but the young boy couldn't help the sudden feeling of dread that had washed over him. The silver-haired Chunin that looked down at them let out another dark chuckle, relishing in the pain he could see clearly in Naruto's eyes. I'm sure you've heard about the monster fox that attacked our village 10 years ago, he began. The one that was defeated when the fourth Hokage sacrificed himself to stop it. Well, ever since that fateful day, a rule was passed down into the village, a rule that only you, Naruto Uzumaki, were never allowed to know about. Mizuki, stop it. It's forbidden to say anything more. Iruka shouted once more. Mizuki simply ignored his fellow instructor's cries and continued to focus on the boy before him. What was it? What was the rule? Naruto gulped. The silver-haired Chunin grinned wickedly, anticipating the sight of seeing the youngster break apart before his very eyes. The rule was that no one was ever allowed mention that you are in fact the nine-tailed fox. Naruto felt his heart clench painfully as Mizuki's words hit him square in the chest, and he couldn't help his eyes widen as the shock began to wash over him. Mizuki, seeing his reaction, simply smiled at the broken sight that met his gaze. That's right, he continued. You're the very monster that almost destroyed our entire village and killed Iruka's parents. Didn't you ever wonder why everyone looked at you the way they did, Why they locked you away in an orphanage and kept you from the rest of the village? Why do you think you were tortured all your life? Suddenly everything started to make sense for the boy. Naruto's entire life, the way he was treated so cruelly by those around him, the beatings he received at the orphanage, and the pain of loss he felt when he looked in the warden's eyes, it all came together in a sickening realization. Iruka watched on with a heavy heart as the tears began to fall from Naruto's eyes, tears that Naruto himself did not even realize he had begun to shed. He knew the boy was just simply too young to understand what was happening, too vulnerable to handle such a terrible truth so soon, and he couldn't help but cringe knowing what pain it must have caused him. In the uneasy silence that followed, Mizuki removed one of the large dai shuriken that was fastened firmly to the holster on his back and spun it around in his hand, the sickening grin never once falling from his expression. Now I'll just kill you both and take the scroll for myself. The village will declare me a hero for killing the monster, and I'll just say the scroll was destroyed. The Chunin then hurled the projectile at the defenseless boy before him, who was now frozen in both fear and disbelief. Naruto, get down! Naruto instinctively reacted to his sensei's call, falling to the ground with his arms covering his head. A sickening crack sounded into the boy's ears, and when he looked up again, Iruka was planted firmly above him, shielding Naruto from the impending blow. Iruka-sensei, why? Iruka let out a cough of blood, wincing in pain as the sharp edge of the weapon protruded from his back. Because you're just like me, Naruto. I know what it feels like to be alone and unwanted. After I lost my parents, no one recognized me anymore, so I acted like the class clown to gain everyone's attention. It was so painful, but I never managed to notice you going through the same pain. I didn't pay enough attention to your sadness and grief. Maybe if I was more aware I could have acted sooner, and things would have been better. I'm so sorry. Mizuki jumped down from his perch and laughed in amusement. Ha! Do you really believe him, Naruto? He just wants the scroll back. He doesn't care what happens to you. How could he possibly ever love the very monster that killed his parents? Naruto turned his head away from the Chunin above him, too ashamed to even look into the man's eyes. He then shifted the sealing scroll onto his back and darted off into the woods as fast as his legs could carry him, his mind now reeling in sadness and confusion. Naruto! Iruka's cries simply fell onto deaf ears as he watched the youngster disappear from view, leaving a trail of falling tears behind his back. See, Iruka? We both know he's going to use the scroll to get revenge on the village. Iruka slowly stood to his feet and pulled the weapon out from his back, despite the pain that wrung throughout his body. He would not allow Mizu to win, he would allow Naruto to be harmed anymore. Naruto's not like that. He spat viciously, before hurling the projectile at a snickering Mizuki. The Chunin simply dodged the attack and glanced back with a menacing smile. You're really pathetic if you think that monster is just going to forgive everyone that wronged him his entire life. It's better for the entire village that I kill him right now before he does anything. Once I'm done with him, I'll come back and finish you off. Mizuki then disappeared into the trees, leaving the wounded Iruka behind. We'll see about that. A young boy quickly rushed through the passing trees as fast as his feet could carry him, desperately trying to escape the pain and anger he felt deep inside. As he made his way from branch to branch, Iruka finally managed to somehow catch up to him. The boy looked back with narrowed eyes as the man approached his side, regarding him with a great deal of mistrust. Naruto, you need to give me the scroll right away. Mizuki is trying to take it from. Before the Chunin could finish, Naruto leapt up from the branch he landed on, and slammed his knee into the man's stomach. Iruka fell from the air soon afterwards and slammed into the ground with a resounding thud, followed soon after by the tired boy that he had been chasing. Naruto then stepped back from the struggling figure in front of him, and leaned against a nearby tree, his exhaustion clearly getting the better of him. Naruto, how did you know? How did you know I wasn't Iruka? The Iruka figure was enveloped in a puff of smoke, revealing the true identity of Mizuki as the henge that disguised him dissipated. Naruto let out a small chuckle before being enveloped in his own small cloud of smoke as well. That's because I'm Iruka, Mizuki hissed angrily as the form of his Chunin counterpart was revealed before him. He then stood up from the floor and wiped the blood that trickled from his mouth, scowling heavily as he realized he had been tricked into chasing a false lead. Unknown to both of them, the real Naruto was quietly listening from behind a nearby tree, hiding himself from both of their views. Why do you fight to protect that little beast? Mizuki began again. You of all people should know by now that the monster would try to use the scroll for his own desires. It pained the boy to hear himself being referred to as nothing more than a beast. Does Iruka-sensei see me as monster as well? He thought quietly to himself, huddling up closer to the scroll in his arms. Does he hate me too? You're right. Naruto felt his heart sink as he recognized Iruka's voice speaking up in reply. I knew it. Iruka doesn't acknowledge me either. No one does. They all hate me, they all just want to hurt me as much as possible. However, before Naruto's thoughts could continue, Iruka suddenly continued. A monster would do something. That Naruto's head propped up again as the words reached him once more, his heart filling with a sudden hope as he continued to listen carefully. But Naruto isn't a monster, he's a special boy who I've come to love and acknowledge. He's had to live a hard life at the hands of the cruelty of others because of something that happened a long time ago, something he never even had any part or say in. But even still, despite all of that hatred shown to him, he knows how to recognize the pain in another person's heart, and he always shows kindness to everyone around him. He isn't a monster, he's a member of the village hidden in the leaves. He's Naruto Uzumaki of Konoha, and he is a special student of mine. Naruto felt the tears stream his whiskered cheeks as the words sank into his racing heart. To hear Iruka say that about him, even though the man was not aware of his presence, it just had to be true. Someone finally acknowledged Naruto for who he really was, and the boy couldn't help the overwhelming emotions that latched onto him. Mizuki, however, simply let out a frustrated sneer before pulling the remaining Dai Shuriken from the holster on his back. Fine, then so be it. I said I was going to kill you later, but I guess that now I've changed my mind. The Chunin then spun the projectile in his hand again and proceeded to charge his prey, fully intent to kill the man before him in a single, powerful blow. Die now! Iruka closed his eyes in a last effort to prepare himself for the inevitable blow. He knew there wasn't anything he could do to avoid it, but even still he could not help the regret that tore at his soul. Naruto, I'm sorry, I wish it wouldn't end this way, but it seems as though this is it for me. I hope you get far away from here into safety. I just wish I could have continued to look after you, to see you happy again, but it looks like I've failed to keep you safe. As Iruka's thought continued to race through his mind, a sharp cry suddenly called out from the nearby trees, bringing the Chunin's eyes to attention once more as they sprang open in their surprise. No! Don't hurt Iruka-sensei. The Chunin then watched in stunned silence as Naruto ran out from behind the nearby tree and rammed into the attacking Mizuki, causing his impending attack to veer off course and fly into the nearby bushes. The silver-haired Chunin looked down at the nuisance that stood beneath him and growled in frustration, before backhanding the boy in the face, much to Iruka's distress, and watching as he slammed firmly into the ground. Do you really think a dead last academy student could defeat a Chunin like me? Mizuki then walked over to the small, quivering boy as he lay on the ground and delivered a powerful kick to his chest, sending him sprawling across the grass in a yelp of pain, before landing just in front of his sensei. No! Naruto! Iruka tried to move over to the boy in an effort to help him, only to be halted by the crippling pain of his own wounds. He could only watch in agony as Mizuki walked over to the crying heap on the floor, ready to finish off the boy with a final blow. Once I'm done with you, he snickered cruelly. I'll kill your idiotic sensei as well. However, much to the Chunin's surprise, Naruto began to shuffle on the ground once more and slowly picked himself back up to his feet. He then squeezed his eyes closed in agony as the pain from his fractured ribs shot throughout his entire body, but still stood his ground despite the pain. I won't let you hurt him. He's the only one who ever loved me, the only one who ever cared for me and gave me a home. I won't let you hurt Iruka-sensei. Naruto's eyes then shot back open, revealing the golden shimmer that glared back the Chunin in place of his normal blue irises. NGGHHH. Aergrig. Mizuki screamed out in pain as his gaze locked with Naruto's own, stumbling back on his feet in a seemingly delusional panic. Iruka watched on in wonder and disbelief as the other man fell to the floor soon afterwards, squirming in complete agony as his blood-chilling cries echoed out into the icy nighttime air. After a few more fleeting moments of pain, Mizuki finally fell deathly silent again, passing out of consciousness due to the massive trauma he had obviously experienced. Naruto's eyes slowly returned to their normal blue shade soon afterwards, and the boy once again found himself being gripped back into reality. He didn't know what actually happened, but he was relieved it was finally over. It was almost as though his body reacted on its own accord, as if responding to the raw emotions he felt inside. He painfully turned around to face the man behind him, only to be met by Iruka's relieved tears. Iruka-sensei. Naruto then jumped into his teacher's arms, ignoring the shooting pain in his own chest, and cried in relief as his arms squeezed tightly around the man's waist. The older man let out a small wince of pain from the sudden motion, but began stroking Naruto's back in a soothing manner despite his own discomfort, if only to ease the boy's tension. It's alright, you're safe now, he whispered gently. He won't hurt us anymore. Iruka then felt a sudden warmth flow into his body, easing the pain of his wounds until they almost disappeared altogether. After a few minutes of simply basking in the relief that washed over them both, Naruto finally pulled back from Iruka's hold and looked into his sensei's eyes. Iruka, am I really a monster like Mizuki said? Iruka gave off a warm smile and then placed his hand on the boy's stomach. Naruto, it's not about what's in here that's important, he offered gently, before moving his hand up to Naruto's chest. It's about what's in here that determines you, who you really are deep inside. He then patted the area around Naruto's heart, gaining an understanding smile from the boy. Naruto then moved his hands up and grabbed Iruka's own, pulling it off from his chest and holding it up against his whiskered cheeks. The boy simply closed his eyes as he continued to hold it there, and allowed himself to bathe in the comforting and genuine emotions that flowed from Iruka's touch. The Chunin himself smiled gently as Naruto's tears continued to run down the side of his face and over Iruka's hand, knowing that they were no longer tears of pain that fell from his eyes, but rather ones of relief and happiness. The boy then looked back up at him and presented a newfound grin, which Iruka returned in kind. Alright, come on kiddo, I think it's time we got back home, it is way past your bedtime. Iruka gained a small chuckle from the boy in response, and then slowly stood up from the ground, surprised to feel almost no pain from the areas around his wounds. He kept a hold on Naruto's hand, never once letting go in the slightest, and began to lead the boy out of the woods and back home once more. Iruka-sensei, what about Mizuki? Are we just going to leave him there? Oh, don't worry about him. Iruka grinned in response. I'll send some shinobi out to retrieve him after we get back to the village. If it's anything like what happened to the other guy, I doubt he'll be waking up for a long time to come. The two then made their way back towards the village walls, Iruka not once letting go of the precious boy beside him. They would need a good night's rest after the events of this evening, and he would have to give a full report to the Hokage in the morning. Naruto just relished in his sensei's comforting hold and allowed himself to be led on without any fear or doubt left in his heart. The man loved him despite everything he knew about the boy, and Naruto never wanted to lose the precious bond that had now formed between them. He would always cherish every moment he shared with the man he considered a father. This I consider to be one of the more difficult chapters one have written and not particularly the best of my work. It still turned out alright though, so I hope you all enjoyed it. Chapter 5. Aftermath. The frantic sound of shuffling feet and murmuring shinobi echoed throughout the unusually busy hallways of the Hokage Tower, as a new morning met with the chaos of its walls. Frustrations were running higher than ever in the ranks of ninja that made their way through the hallway, passing a lone Iruka as he made his way to his awaiting destination. Ever since the events of the previous night, regarding a certain young boy's infiltration of the Hokage's library, the security levels the old building had been on high alert, and there were shinobi stationed at just about every door and corner. Having such a dangerous and valuable item, such as the scroll of sealing, stolen by a 10-year-old boy who was considered little more than a nuisance, had everyone on the edge of their seats. Iruka, however, knew that there was no possible way for a young academy student who barely any skills as a ninja to sneak past trained shinobi undetected, and he suspected that Mizuki had played a great part in his apparent success. The silver-haired Chunin had obviously planned the entire setup with careful consideration and only used Naruto as a scapegoat to cover his tracks and take the blame. It was an underhanded and despicable ploy on Mizuki's part to use an innocent child to his advantage, especially considering the boy's status and the animosity directed towards him. Naruto had always been seen as nothing but trouble in the eyes of the village, so it wasn't surprising that he would immediately be marked an accusation for the theft without little consideration or debate. Iruka scowled at the thought of it. First, Naruto hospitalized one of his wardens in a desperate act of self-defense. Then he was tricked into stealing a dangerous scroll because of the feelings of inadequacy he held in his heart. Add to that the fact that the Kyuubi was sealed inside him, and you've got a big red targeting ring painted on the poor boy's back. It wouldn't have surprised the Chunin if there were already requests put in for Naruto's immediate execution. Iruka didn't even want to think about what would happen if word of his possible bloodline got out as well, which is how the fuming sensei now found himself walking to the Sandame's office so early in the morning. He had to deliver his report on the previous night's events to try and clear Naruto's tarnished name. Although the Hokage already knew of Mizuki's part in the entire ordeal, the Chunin still needed to submit sufficient evidence to present to the council and show his student's innocence in the matter. Iruka shook of his frustrations about the unfair light the boy was viewed in and approached the door to the third's office with newfound determination. The A&B guards stationed outside promptly let him in, and the Chunin soon found himself in front of the old man who sported a smoldering pipe firmly held within his mouth. Ah, Iruka. I was expecting you a bit sooner, although I'm sure you have your reasons for arriving late. Iruka gave a small apologetic bow in respect as the door closed gently behind him. My apologies, Lord Hokage, but I had to make sure Naruto arrived safely at the academy. After everything that's happened last night, I was afraid of letting him walk there by himself. Sarutobi let a brief smile stretch across his old and tired lips. It seemed the Chunin before him put the Naruto's safety above everyone else, including the Hokage himself. It was comforting for the old man to know that someone really cared that much for the boy, and soon his doubts about Iruka taking care of him were washed away completely. After a few more moments of bathing in his own subtle relief, the old man's face took on a far more serious expression. I assume you've completed your report? He inquired firmly. I would like to clear this matter up as soon as possible before it blows out of my ability to handle. Iruka walked up to the desk with his files in hand and promptly dropped them onto the wooden surface. I've given a detailed description of everything that happened last night. I've also made it clearly obvious that Naruto was manipulated into stealing the scroll by Mizuki for the man's own purposes. To impose any punishment on a boy who couldn't have possibly known any better in the matter would not only be unjust, but it would also throw into question the morals of the citizens of Konoha. I think you'll find the evidence pointing to Mizuki's betrayal to be irrefutable, and once he comes around from his comatose state, Ibiki can interrogate him to clarify any further discrepancies one might try to raise. Sarutobi raised his eyebrows in astonishment. He had never seen so much absolute will and determination in Iruka's eyes as that he was witnessing now. The Chunin had covered all his tracks without any room for possible error. He had carefully planned his entire defense of Naruto, and he would be damned if it wasn't perfect. Very well, Iruka. Sarutobi sighed in relief. I will present your case to the council and vouch in support of your honesty and your character. Naruto should be safe for now, at least until this matter is completely resolved or he is otherwise proven to be guilty after further investigation. Although I doubt anyone would be able to put forward such incriminating evidence. Iruka gave out a sigh of relief of his own thereafter, immediately losing his somber stare in light of a more relaxed expression. It seemed as though things were under control for now and Naruto wasn't in any immediate danger yet. Now all that was left for the Chunin was to clear up one more matter with regards to his pupil. The third looked up at him with a curious expression, noticing the firm look on the Chunin's face, and took another deep draw from his pipe. You have something else you wish to speak about? Iruka nodded silently in confirmation. I have a request to make with regards to Naruto's advancement as a shinobi. I did some digging around at the academy before I arrived here and I've discovered some discrepancies with regards to the latest assessment exam. Sarutobi let out a puff of smoke along with a deep sigh. He knew where this was going. I've since discovered that it was Mizuki who requested that the exam be a written test. Iruka continued. He obviously knew about Naruto's shortcomings and used them to herd the boy into a vulnerable position. In light of this, I request that Naruto be allowed to pass the exam and proceed into the next stages of academy training. The old man listening simply leaned into the back of his chair and folded his fingers into one another, closing his eyes in thought. A few moments later, he spoke up once more, his voice laced with a lingering hint of regret. Iruka, as much as I understand your concern about Naruto's progress and well-being, what Mizuki did was not strictly against procedure. Unfortunately, I cannot allow the boy to pass based on this knowledge alone. The council would never accept such a decision just because of a mere accusation on your part. Iruka nodded his head in understanding. I am aware of the possible ramifications of such an act, which is why I have given an assigned application for Naruto's advancement into the next level of training. According to academy procedure, if an instructor deems one of his students ready for higher levels of training, he may request an early advancement based on that student's performance. Sarutobi opened his eyes again and locked his gaze with Iruka once more, somewhat surprised by the proposition put forward. What you say is true. He agreed. You are allowed to vouch in your student's favor if you deem him worthy, but I will need sufficient justification if I am to present a valid case. The Academy Board will not allow such an advancement unless there is enough evidence to support your assessment of Naruto's capabilities. Iruka then pulled out another envelope from his vest and handed it to the Hokage, sporting a sly grin on his face. I think you'll find more than enough justification in there. The fact that Naruto stood up to a Chunin and readily laid his life on the line to protect someone else from harm speaks volumes for the boy in itself. The fact that he actually managed to defeat that Chunin, I believe, is more than enough reason for him to pass. Sarutobi opened the envelope and began to briefly scan over its contents, regarding it carefully as he inspected the evidence presented. After a brief overview he looked back up again, only this time his eyes narrowed somewhat. Iruka, I want you to be sure that this is the best course of action to take. I'm afraid that the Naruto's setbacks may cause him some difficulty with his learning. Perhaps it is better that he be allowed these 6 months to regain the basic skills he has been denied all these years. Lord Hokage, with all due respect, this is Naruto's only dream. Iruka responded, somewhat firmly. It's the only thing he has left to hold on to keep him moving forward. If we keep him back now, I'm afraid that he'll only fall even deeper into the hole that has been dug for him. I swore to Naruto that I would fix this problem. I'll do everything in my power to ensure that he learns everything he needs to know so that he can catch up to the rest of his class. Sarutobi couldn't help it as a small grin stretched across his lips, satisfied to see the resolve firmly set in Iruka's heart. He recognized the strength he could see in the young man's eyes, and it was that very will of fire burning in his gaze that promised the old man looking into them of the truth. In his words, Iruka was adamant to see Naruto's dreams come true, and Sarutobi found himself unable to deny his request. Very well. I'll see to it that your application is honored at the soonest possible convenience. But right now we have other pressing matters to discuss. At that moment, as if on cue to the Hokage's words, the doors behind Iruka suddenly sprang open, revealing a young woman with deep red eyes as she appeared from behind them. Ah, Kurenai, you're just in time, the Sandaime smiled, gaining a respectful bow from the woman as she approached his desk. Lord Hokage, you wish to see me? She inquired respectfully. Sarutobi stood from his chair and walked around his desk to approach the two shinobi standing before him. There is a matter of great concern that I wish you to help us with. I'm sure you've heard of the young boy named Naruto Uzumaki, have you not? Kurenai nodded in confirmation. You mean that academy student I keep hearing so many things about? Apparently he's caused quite a lot of problems lately, what with the recent series of mishaps surrounding him. Iruka shot a deadly glance over towards the Jounin speaking, radiating a sudden killer intent that made her back up a bit in her words. Naruto isn't some pest that you can just step all over and get rid of. He spat bitterly. He's a kind and friendly boy who's been labeled unfairly by those around him. I suggest you speak carefully about him when you're near me. Both the Hokage and Kurenai were taken aback somewhat by Iruka's sudden flare of aggressiveness, but the old man could understand why he reacted the way he did. Kurenai, Sarutobi began again. What you have heard about Naruto from your peers is not to be taken to heart so easily. Remember that the boy is the holder of the Kyuubi, and as such he is often subjected to unfair treatment and harassment from those around him. Kurenai tried to see the Hokage's point of view, but she was still hung up on the image of the troublemaker she had always heard him to be. But Lord Hokage, I've heard reports that he hospitalized one of his wardens. It was in self-defense. Iruka snapped back, cutting her off before she could continue. Self-defense? From what? What did the man do to warrant being put in hospital? This time, Iruka felt his blood chill in his veins. He would have broken the Jounin's neck right then if it weren't for the fact that she would be helping Naruto in the coming days. Instead, he just took a deep breath to try and calm his nerves and began to explain. You talk about Naruto as if you already know who he is, but you have no idea what that boy has been through. Those bastards at that goddamned orphanage used to beat him every single night just for the sake of it. A young boy who could hardly defend himself was subjected to the tortures of his caretakers all because of the stupid monster sealed inside him, and all you can do is assume he's the one to blame for his situation. Kurenai's expression began to sink into a frown at the sound of Iruka's words. I had no idea, she stammered in surprise. That's right, you don't have any idea, Iruka retorted. No one has any goddamned idea what kind of life that kid has had to live, but I know. I could feel it every time I touched the boy. All of the pain and sadness he felt inside. You couldn't possibly imagine what it feels like to have those emotions coursing through into your heart. Sarutobi quickly placed his hand on Iruka's shoulder, prompting the enraged man to calm down somewhat at his firm hold. The Chunin then took a deep, quivering breath and gazed back into Kurenai's eyes. He began to relax, however, when he saw the sudden shock and guilt etched onto the Jounin's face. Iruka, I'm sorry I didn't. It's alright. Iruka cut her off, his tone dropping into a near whisper. I shouldn't have reacted like that. You had no way of knowing what was happening to him. The Hokage quickly took another deep draw from his still smoldering pipe soon afterwards, trying to ease his own overstressed nerves. Iruka may have only been a Chunin, but he could swear the young man would have killed Kurenai if the situation wasn't handled as quickly as it was. After allowing the two some time to calm down and think, he began to speak once again. Kurenai, the reason I called you here is to help Iruka access Naruto for any possible bloodline traits. We believe the boy hospitalized his warden with an advanced genjutsu, but we are not sure exactly how he managed to cast it. Iruka held up his hand to stop Sarutobi in his tracks. If I may, Lord Hokage. The old man nodded and allowed Iruka to continue. After gaining the man's confirmation, the Chunin began to speak once more. Last night, Naruto used the same attack again on Mizuki when he tried to kill us. I didn't actually see it properly because I was standing behind Naruto, but it was very clear that he didn't form any hand signs at all. In fact, he made no other body movements at all. I have no doubt whatsoever now that whatever that attack was, it was definitely cast by a Dijutsu. Kurenai's eyes widened in surprise. You mean like the Sharingan? Iruka nodded in confirmation. Yes, only Naruto isn't an Uchiha, so I doubt it is related to the Sharingan in any way. This is something else altogether, something we've never come across before. That is why I called you here. The Sandaime spoke up once more, continuing in Iruka's stead. I need you to work with Iruka and discover how this genjutsu, if it even is one, actually works. If we can discover its source, it may lead us into discovering what kind of bloodline this may be and what abilities it grants Naruto. Go with Iruka to the academy as soon as possible and see what you can find out. The sooner we uncover this mystery, the sooner we can help Naruto learn to control it before he or someone else gets hurt. Kurenai nodded in silent approval shortly before the two shinobi made their way out the door. Just before Iruka disappeared from view, the Hokage called out once more. I will see to it that Naruto's results be reassessed immediately. I only hope he's ready for what you're putting him up to. Iruka smiled and then nodded his head. I'll personally ensure that Naruto gets the attention he deserves, even if it takes all the time and strength I have. With that, the Chunin disappeared with Kurenai down the hallway, leaving a concerned old man to his wandering thoughts. As the cheery sounds of laughing children sounded throughout the small academy playground, Naruto quietly sat on one of the swings, rocking himself in a gentle sway as the warm sunlight caressed his skin. The boy tried desperately not to draw any attention to himself as he sat upon its small wooden frame alone. He felt so isolated and afraid without Iruka there to protect him from harm, and knowing exactly why he was hated didn't help him feel any better. When the scarred Chunin had told Naruto that he needed to see the Hokage, the boy had begged for him to stay, not wanting to be left alone amongst others that might do him harm. After some convincing on Iruka's part, the boy reluctantly accepted and let the man go on his way. He knew it was important for his sensei to report his findings, for both Konoha's sake and for Naruto's own, but now he once again found himself exposed and vulnerable. Ever since the Iruka taken him in, clothed him and shared his love with the boy, Naruto finally began to feel safe for the first time in his life. Now it was like his shield had been taken away from him once more, leaving him vulnerable and completely subjecting the boy to the cruel world around him. The youngster didn't even have any friends to support him and spend his breaks with. Despite all of this, Naruto desperately tried to find the courage to stay strong. He knew Iruka wouldn't leave him alone for too long, and it was only a matter of time before his sensei was back and he could feel safe again. He silently watched as his feet dangled aimlessly beneath him, allowing his painful thoughts to wander on the events of the previous night. It was still a little overwhelming for the boy to learn that the Kyuubi was sealed inside him, to finally know why he had been abused his entire life, and Naruto couldn't help but feel the unfairness of it all. Why was he the one that was left with no parents? Why was he the one that had a monster sealed inside of him? Why did the other children tease and bully him all the time while the adults stared at him with hateful eyes? Why was it always him? Unfortunately, that wasn't the only thing that bothered the boy. The results for the assessment exam were being posted in the hallway today, and Naruto knew he would have obviously failed miserably. Once everyone learned that the dobe hadn't passed, he would be subjected to even more name-calling and bullying, not to mention the fact that the rest of his class would no doubt advance ahead, while he would be forced to stay back for another 6 months. He didn't know if he could fit into a new class. It had taken a lot of time, but he was finally growing used to the group he was already in. Even though he was still hurt by their cruel taunts and snickers, some of them were still alright, while others even managed to ignore him altogether. Naruto's thoughts were suddenly jarred when the end of their break was announced. The boy took a deep breath and mentally prepared himself for what would come, and then reluctantly pulled himself off the safety of his swing, and made his way back into the hallway, back into the dangers of those cruel stares that threatened him with their promise of pain and sadness. As he made his way towards his classroom, he noticed a crowd forming around a postboard on the side of the wall. Many attentive eyes searched through the paper that had been pasted on the board, while curious whispers sounded throughout the air. Naruto stood on the tips of his toes, trying to see what all of the fuss was about. Although he was the shortest in his class, he somehow managed to gain view of the contents of the paper, but this only prompted the boy into a frown. It was the results for the assessment exams. Naruto then fell back down onto the flats of his feet and slowly walked away. There was no point in looking for his own name. After all, they didn't even show the names of those who failed. He was just about to give up any hope of mercy, when a sudden call drew his attention once more. "Hey, do you see that? The dobe actually managed to pass after all." Naruto's heart suddenly jumped into his throat as his body froze into place, his shock overwhelming his body as the words nagged at his heart. They couldn't be talking about him, could they? He then quickly turned around on the spot and, after whipping his face of the evidence of his emotions, ran up to the board to look over it again. After squeezing his small body through the crowd that had gathered, trying not to touch those around him, he finally managed to gain access to the results sheet. There, right near the bottom of the list, was his name, Naruto Uzumaki. The boy almost had a heart attack as his mind translated one of the few words he recognized, his own name, while his eyes momentarily flared into a golden HEW, and then back again. However, despite his shock, he somehow managed to contain the overwhelming emotions that filled inside of him. He had passed barely, but it was still a pass nonetheless. But how? Naruto thought quietly to himself. I'm sure I didn't answer any questions. An ember of hope finally reignited in Naruto's tattered, worn-out heart, breathing new life back into his dream of becoming a shinobi and proving his worth to those around him. The boy almost collapsed into tears on the spot, but he quickly reminded himself of his current location as well as the company present around him. He then gathered what little strength he had to keep himself from falling and gently squeezed back out of the crowd again, before making his way back into the classroom while trying to absorb what had just occurred. The boy didn't even notice the stares and whispers of those around him as he walked back up to his seat, nor the eyes that continued to hold him in their stare. It was as though the entire world had blanked out completely, leaving only Naruto and his emotions behind. The blonde plunked down into his chair with little thought or care and slouched over onto his desk. The substitute teacher that was covering for Iruka while the Chunin was gone, walked into the class and cleared his throat to speak. "Alright, ladies and gentlemen, as I'm sure you are all aware, the results for yesterday's assessment exam have been released. All those who failed will be removed from their classrooms from tomorrow morning and will be registered into a new class to try again in 6 months. As for those who have passed, all I can say is congratulations. From tomorrow onwards, you will now start learning the more advanced forms shinobi conduct and combat skills, as well as some minor jutsu training as well. This will be a lot harder than what you've been accustomed learning so far, and if any of you are still unsure about your ability to continue yet, you may submit a form to the academy to be held back for another 6 months for more preparation. All such forms need to be handed in by the end of today." The substitute teacher then turned to the door to see Iruka stepping inside. At the sight of his sensei's return, Naruto's face lit up like an exploding bonfire. His eyes began to shimmer in a golden HEW as a sudden relief set into his racing heart. He was safe again. Just being in the same room as Iruka was enough to make the boy feel warm and protected. His eyes then returned to their normal shade and shifted to the dark-haired woman that entered in behind him. "Who is she?" he mumbled to himself, scowling at the thought of his sensei spending time with someone else. When the said woman's eyes shifted over in his direction, Naruto grew uncomfortable in his chair. Somehow he knew that her gaze was specifically fixed onto his form, almost studying him like a one would study their prey. Naruto sank into his seat and tried to ignore the woman's glare while refocusing his gaze and watching as the substitute teacher bowed to Iruka, before being relieved of his duties to the class. Once the man was out of the room, the scarred Chunin turned to his students and began to speak. "Alright class, I've got some good news for you all. The academy has decided to give you the rest of the day off in light of yesterday's exam, so go home and take a well-deserved break. You'll need it for tomorrow." A sudden cheer erupted around the classroom as the excited students burst from their seats to dart for the door. Before they got very far, Iruka called out again, "Oh, and don't forget to tell your parents your results. I'm sure they'll want to hear how you all did." The Chunin couldn't help the snicker that caught under his breath as a unanimous mumble of irritation reverberated amongst some of the leaving students, causing him to grin in satisfaction. Naruto, however, simply waited quietly at his desk for the other kids to leave and then jumped out of his seat and ran down to the man waiting at the end of the class. The boy then leapt into his sensei's arms and squeezed as tightly as he could, with no condemning eyes to witness the embrace. Iruka-sensei, I miss you so much. I was a bit scared without having you here. Iruka returned the tight hug, kneeling down to meet his student's height. I was only gone for 3 hours, Naruto. It wasn't that bad, was it? The boy chuckled in response as if to shrug off his sensei's words, but the relief Iruka felt emanating of his body told him that Naruto was in fact telling the truth. Naruto then quickly snapped into a big grin, remembering what he was so excited about telling the man. Did you hear, Iruka-sensei? I passed the exam. I don't know how, but I actually managed to pass. Kurenai watched on in surprise as Iruka ruffled the blonde's hair in congratulations, gaining an innocent giggle and a few previously unshed tears of joy. Was this the same boy that everyone had told her to watch out for? This kid, who was so fragile and desperate after being apart from Iruka for only a few moments. The Jounin quickly shook her head in silent frustration at the mere thought of it, realizing that she had been suckered by the misinformed words of her peers. A few moments later, Naruto pulled out of the hug that had held him closely and then, realizing that the other woman was still standing there, quickly hid away behind Iruka's body. The Chunin then stood to his feet and looked down at the panicked eyes of his student. Naruto, this is Kurenai. Iruka announced carefully. She's going to help you deal with these new powers you seem to have. The scarred Chunin tried to explain the reason for the Chunin being there as lightly as he could. After all, he didn't want to confuse the boy too much or scare him for that matter. But even despite that, Naruto's eyes never lost their waver as he regarded the woman with a great deal of mistrust. Kurenai, seeing the boy's discomfort, knelt down in front of the timid blonde and offered her hand with a smile. It's nice to meet you, Naruto. However, despite her attempts at gaining his approval, Naruto just pulled further back away from her, shielding himself behind Iruka's protective form. The Jounin could see the genuine fear in the child's eyes as well as something else, however, before she could think on it. Iruka gave out a sigh, then tried to reassure the boy of her good intentions. Hey kiddo, there's no need to be afraid. You can trust Kurenai, she's not going to hurt you. Naruto, however, remained unmoving and Iruka could feel the grip of fear that held the boy's heart in place flowing through his touch. He could also feel Naruto's body begin to tremble in the woman's presence, signifying his obvious discomfort. After a few moments of silence, Iruka finally slouched in defeat, realizing the obvious reason for the boy's concern. He then walked the Naruto over to the door while Kurenai remained on her haunches, frozen in disbelief. Naruto, can you wait for us in the playground? I'll be out in a minute, I just need to speak to Kurenai-sama alone for a moment. Naruto reluctantly accepted, trusting his sensei's promise to see him soon. He slowly walked down the hallway, only looking back to see his sensei smiling in reassurance. Once the boy was gone from view, Iruka turned back to see a clearly stunned and slightly shaken Kurenai looking back at him. I didn't realize just how bad it is for him, she admitted with a guilty tone apparent in her voice. Those bastards. When I get my hands on those lying, deceitful, useless piles of ugh. How could I have even listened to them? I'm no better than the ones that made Naruto's life a living hell. Iruka just walked up to the fuming Jounin and put his hand on her shoulder. It's not your fault. Naruto isn't this way because of anything you did. I think this whole incident with Mizuki has shaken Naruto's ability to grow closer to other people. That bastard was one of his teachers, someone the boy should have been able to believe in and look up to. Now Mizuki's betrayal has made Naruto question his own trust in others. I think I'm the only one he'll allow himself to even make contact with anymore. He's probably too afraid that someone will use his own feelings against him if he allows them to touch him anymore. Kurenai's face began to fill with confusion. What do you mean by that? About someone touching him? Iruka let go of his grip on the Jounin's shoulder and walked over to the door, opening it to go outside. I think it's better if you found out for yourself. It's not something I can easily explain. Come, let's go see him together. Maybe if you two spend some time with one another he might open up to you, although I'm no longer sure if that's even possible considering how he's been treated. Kurenai took a deep breath and then followed Iruka out the door. She felt a terrible guilt weighing inside of her heart. How could this child suffer so much pain because of the narrow-minded opinions of those fools around him? Opinions that she herself had been influenced by much to her own disgust. She could see that Naruto was slowly allowing himself to sink into an inescapable isolation, and it wasn't healthy for the boy to break his ties with the rest of the world. Kurenai silently vowed then and there that she would do everything in her power to help Naruto if it was in her capability to do so. It was the least she could do to right the wrongs of those that made his life miserable. Chapter 6: Earning a Young Boy's Trust. A desperately heavy heart races in built-up suspense as two shinobi slowly made their way out of the academy hallway, entering into the small playground where Naruto had been asked to wait. As the warm soft midday sunlight caught the two in its heated gaze, the young boy they had sworn to help slowly came into their view, swaying slowly on the protective wooden swing that he had always sat on during his school breaks. Kurenai was afraid. In fact, it was more accurate to say she was terrified. For the first time since becoming a jounin, she found herself questioning her own abilities and whether or not she would actually be able to do any good. But after seeing Naruto look up to them with fearful eyes at their approach, she reinforced her resolve with newfound determination. She had to help Naruto. She had to right the wrongs he had lived with all his life, wrongs that she herself had been party to even if it was in an indirect way. The young woman had never seen such terrified eyes as the ones she saw in the blonde boy they were approaching, and she was almost heartbroken at how afraid Naruto was just being near a stranger. Had Mizuki really done so much damage in a single act of betrayal, or was it just that Naruto's heart was already too frail to defend itself from any more suffering? Unfortunately, the Jounin already knew the answer to that question, and she was beginning to understand why Iruka was so defensive over his student. The Chunin didn't want any corrupt hearts to even come near the boy, much less try to form a bond with him. As the two shinobi approached the swing on which Naruto sat, Iruka slowly stepped up to the boy and knelt down in front of him. Naruto's gaze locked with his sensei's and Iruka took his hand into his own, rubbing it gently in reassurance. Naruto, I know you're afraid about all of this. I know that what Mizuki did tested your trust in others, but I need you to please work with me here. Kurenai is going to help you deal with these powers you have, but she can't do anything if you don't allow her to come close to you. Do you understand what I am trying to tell you? Iruka tried to feel for any emotions that would tell him what Naruto was feeling, however it did little to reassure his nerves. He could sense a hint of fear and confusion, but that soon turned to denial and mistrust. Iruka-sensei, I already trusted one person too much and look where that got me. Naruto finally responded. I almost lost you. I almost lost the only person who ever loved me, and now you just want me to do it all over again. How do I know she's not going to hurt us as well? Kurenai watched in dismay as the boy's eyes began to fill with panic. The words that fell from his lips stung deeply at the woman's heart, cutting it apart like a jagged blade. She knew she wouldn't have done anything like Mizuki, but it still didn't help her feel any better about the situation. Iruka took a deep breath, citing the youngster's heavy words, and continued to try win Naruto over. Look, Kurenai is not going to do anything to hurt you. I trust her, and I know she feels bad about what happened to you. Please just try at least. I'll be here the whole time, and if you start to feel uncomfortable you just tell me and I'll stop everything immediately. Is that alright with you? Naruto seemed to regard the man's words carefully, and then finally released a heavy, anguished breath despite himself. He then spoke up once again, only this time in a near whisper. Alright, but only if you promise to stop when I say so. Iruka nodded in approval and then offered Naruto his hand, before leading the still quivering boy up from the swing and over to Kurenai. The young blonde only did his best to follow nervously behind him, while still trying to use Iruka's body as a shield from the woman's gaze. Once they had reached the waiting Kurenai, Iruka stepped aside in order to allow her access to the child firmly attached to his side. Naruto, I need you to give Kurenai your hand, please. Naruto simply regarded the said woman with a great deal of fear and then looked up to his sensei once more, his eyes widening in surprise at the sudden and unexpected request. But why Iruka-sensei? He stammered precariously. I don't know if it's just that. Iruka, however, quickly placed his hand on Naruto's shoulder to calm his nerves, while squeezing it in reassurance. I need you to do this because it's the only way she can understand. He offered gently. Please Naruto, I won't let anything happen to you, I promise. The said boy cringed in fear and then looked up to Kurenai again, who was clearly still confused as to what exactly was going on, but a quick glance from Iruka prompted her into following his lead. The Jounin then slowly knelt down in front of the boy and offered her hand. Naruto, I promise I won't hurt you. I just want to help. Naruto took a deep gulp and looked up to his sensei again, as if silently pleading for his advice. After one more reassuring nod on the Chunin's part, the boy looked into Kurenai's eyes and then slowly held out his hand. He quickly pulled it back again in fear, half expecting something bad to happen, but then moved it out to meet hers again once he was certain of his safety. His quivering hand eventually made its way to the nervous Jounin's own and slowly fell onto it with a light touch. Kurenai felt the boy's shaking fingers press against her palm, and then she gently closed her own hand around his to hold it in place. They both simply stood there silently in the moments that followed, either one moving for what felt like an eternity, until finally it happened. Kurenai's eyes widened in surprise as a sudden rush of emotions filled into her unprepared heart, and almost jumped at the unexpected feelings that coursed through her body. At first she could feel confusion and panic, but it eventually ran into full-blown terror. She quickly looked up to Iruka once more, her eyes wavering in the evidence of her disbelief, who only nodded as if to answer an unspoken question on her part. Kurenai then looked back into Naruto's eyes once more and began to notice the shimmer of gold reflecting back at her. The boy's face began to fall into a frown soon afterwards and tears slowly began to touch against his cheeks. Are these his emotions? Is this his Naruto's pain and fear that I'm feeling inside? There was so much fear, so much panic in Naruto's heart, that it even brought the boy to tears. Kurenai silently cursed under her breath following such emotions, realizing just how much psychological damage the boy must have endured, especially if he couldn't even touch a stranger without breaking apart completely. Eventually, as if to honor a silent request on Naruto's part, Kurenai finally released her grip on the boy's hand and freed him from the fear that held him frozen in place. She then offered to back away and gave the boy some space, allowing Iruka the freedom to kneel down in front of him and embrace the boy in a reassuring hug. That was good, Naruto, he whispered gently, rubbing the youngster's back in a soothing motion while easing the tension that still gripped his heart. I'm so proud of you. That wasn't so bad, was it? Naruto simply continued to stand there silently, still shaking someone despite the comforting hold that enveloped him. However, he still managed a brief nod despite himself. After a few more moments of relief, Iruka finally pulled out from the embrace, and then walked off to the side with an equally shaken Kurenai. Once they were a bit further away from Naruto, the two began to speak out of reach of his ears. So judging by the look on your face, I guess that means you felt it, right? Kurenai just nodded in confirmation, trying to brush off the lingering emotions that still clung to her soul. What was that just now? She mumbled, trying to discern what had just happened. Iruka just took a deep breath, and then began to explain. The first time I felt it was the day Naruto had been kicked out of the orphanage. He began solemnly. I think it has something to do with his bloodline, but I'm not entirely sure yet. Every time he's exposed to prolonged contact with another person, his feelings and emotions seem to flow freely onto them. Kurenai nodded her head in understanding. It did make sense after all, and it was the only thing that would explain what she had felt right then. There was just one thing that was bothering her about all of this. But if Naruto shares his feelings with others through prolonged touch, then why hasn't anyone ever noticed this before? Surely by now someone should have realized that this was happening. However, the Jounin's inquiry was only met with a discomforting frown on Iruka's part. I asked myself the same question at first, but after spending some time with Naruto, the answer soon became painfully obvious. His feelings only begin to flow into the one touching him after a few seconds of exposure, and I doubt Naruto has ever touched someone for that long before his first hug with me. The Jounin listening couldn't help as her eyes widened in shock at the man's words. She didn't want to hear what Iruka had to say next, but he continued to explain nonetheless. Before 2 days ago, Naruto had never received a hug in his entire life. He had never been embraced or carried in another person's arms. He had never even held the hand of someone that cared for him. The only time Naruto ever came into physical contact with another person's touch was when their fists were crashing into him. That kind of cruel exposure never lasted more than a second at the most. Kurenai felt the tears begin to fall onto her cheeks as the man's words continued to fill her with the bitter taste of remorse. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. She couldn't believe that someone could treat a poor boy so cruelly his entire life. How had he even managed to survive this long in such absolute isolation? Now you know why. Iruka confirmed bitterly. This is why Naruto is so reluctant to allow others to touch him. I think that he's picked up on the fact that this strange bond occurs. I think it's because he can feel it as well as we can. So you mean it works both ways when he touches someone? Iruka nodded his head in confirmation to the Jounin's question. Yes, I believe so. Sometimes when I get angry or upset while holding Naruto, he seems to become afraid or panicked in my arms. I have to be careful when I'm touching him, in case I do any more damage to his already broken soul. After a few more moments shared between the two, Kurenai let out a deep, tired breath, announcing the end of their assessment with a heavy sigh. Thanks, Iruka. She offered gratefully. I know it must be hard to share this information with someone else, but I assure you, this will stay between us and the Hokage. I won't do anything to betray your trust. Iruka's eyes brought on a more grateful expression at the Jounin's words. I appreciate that more than you could ever know. So then, are you ready to continue? Kurenai simply nodded, brushing off the last remnants of the emotion she felt, and then followed Iruka back to where Naruto stood. Naruto quietly watched from the distance as the two older shinobi spoke out of reach of his ear. The boy couldn't help but wonder what they were saying to one another. This whole situation was scaring Naruto completely, and he began to question whether it was such a good idea to agree with this in the first place. Another thing that bothered him was how trusting Iruka seemed to be around this strange woman. He and Mizuki had been friends for a long time, but that still didn't stop the silver-haired Chunin from turning on Iruka the first chance he got. Naruto had almost lost the most important person in his life last night, and now he was worried that this Kurenai was only there to steal him away again. It wouldn't have surprised the boy. All his life, everyone around him did everything in their power to see him miserable. What if this was all just a ploy to keep him from the one person that seemed to care? Naruto quickly shook his head from side to side, trying to brush off the uneasy emotions he felt inside while clearing his mind of doubt. Iruka told me that he trusts her. He wouldn't lie to me, would he? He mumbled quietly, trying to convince himself of their good intentions. He was so confused, so hopelessly lost in everything that was happening. When he touched her, he could feel Kurenai's panic and unease flowing into his heart as well, and it made the woman's motives that much more difficult to discern. Was she afraid of him? No, that wasn't it. It was something else completely, like concern almost and a bit of remorse. This confused Naruto even more, but before his thoughts could find an answer in the depths of his own reasoning, the two shinobi that had inhabited his mind were already making their way back to where he was standing. The young boy quickly hid his emotions behind a quickly conceived mask and tried to look as natural as possible, but it didn't help too much though, because Iruka could immediately notice the distressed look on the boy's face. Once the two had reached him, Iruka knelt down in front of Naruto once more and then began to speak softly. Naruto, if it's alright with you, I'd ask to continue working with Kurenai for now to find out what's going on. Do you think you can do that for me? Naruto looked up to the said woman, locking with her gaze. Her eyes seemed to be begging for his acceptance. The then let out a deep sigh and nodded his head in silent approval. Maybe I should give her a chance after all, but only for a little while. He thought quietly to himself. Iruka quickly lit up into a grin following the youngster's response, and then stood from his haunches. Kurenai herself couldn't contain her own smile as she delighted in the fact that he may start trusting her after all. Alright then, let's get started. A few hours had passed since Kurenai had begun her evaluation of Naruto's abilities, and the boy had spent the better part of that time answering one question after another. First about the time in the orphanage when he had hospitalized his caretaker, and about the previous night during the incident with Mizuki. It was painful for him to once again recite the terrible events of those 2 nights. But a warm hand from Iruka kept Naruto from breaking apart on the spot. Every time the jounin would ask a particularly difficult question, she would cringe in discomfort as Naruto's eyes sank deeper into sadness, shedding another held-back tear. But she also knew that she had no other choice and that she had to learn as much as she could if there was to be any hope of discovering Naruto's hidden abilities. Once her investigation was complete, and she had enough information to work with, the jounin moved on to the next step. Alright Naruto, I know that was hard but I'm grateful for your honesty, she offered gently, praising Naruto for his bravery. Kurenai then stood up from her seat on the grass and prompted the boy to do the same. A teary-eyed Naruto slowly stood from the ground and followed her lead. Iruka, if it's alright with you, I'd like a moment alone with Naruto. Iruka looked down at the boy to gain his approval, to which Naruto nodded in silence. The Chunin then made his way of the field and stepped inside the academy structure. He took one last look back to see if Naruto was fine and flashed a reassuring smile to calm the boy's nerves. Once he was out of view, Kurenai turned to back Naruto again before holding out her hand and offering it to the boy. Naruto took a deep gulp once again, and then reluctantly accepted. The jounin then led him over to the nearby swings, before seating herself down on one of them, and then prompting Naruto to sit next to her. The 2 of them just remained there in silence in the moments that followed, either one talking as they swayed gently back and forth in the cool afternoon breeze. Kurenai knew that before she could help Naruto, she would have to gain his trust and understanding, so she decided to give the 2 of them a moment to just grow comfortable in one another's presence. She had to break through the shell that he had formed around his heart. He's a good person, isn't he? The young woman finally offered, breaking the silence with gentle words. Naruto simply regarded Kurenai with a confused expression, prompting her to explain. Iruka, I mean. He's always been so kind to those around him. In all the time I've known him, the man always did what he could to help others in need. He even stood up for you even when everyone else condemned you, even when I condemned you. I wish I was more like that. The small evidence of emotion then began to form in Kurenai's own eyes, causing Naruto's heart to fill with panic and concern as he saw the unmistakable pain in her gaze. The woman then slowly stepped off her seat and knelt in front of the blue-eyed boy beside her, before taking a hold of both of his hands and holding them firmly in her own, stroking her thumbs over them in a soothing comfort. I'm so sorry about all of this, she whispered softly. I was just the same as everyone else. I never knew what kind of pain you were going through, but instead of trying to find the truth I just assumed the worst. This is the only way I can make things up to you, so I need you to let me help. Naruto could feel the sincerity flowing from Kurenai's touch. He couldn't detect any deceit or hatred in her heart, but even still the lingering dread that clung firmly to his heart remained regardless. He wanted to trust Kurenai, he wanted to hug her and tell her that he forgave her, but his heart was warning him not to get too close lest he was burned again as he had been before. He couldn't allow anyone else to gain advantage of his emotions anymore, no matter how sincere they appeared to be. Kurenai, noticing the feelings of confusion emanating of Naruto's touch, slowly released her grip around his hands and withdrew from his touch, as if to respect his emotions. However, the soft words that followed soon afterwards caught her by surprise as they fell from his lips. It's alright. The red-eyed jounin quickly looked up in surprise as she heard the near whisper of Naruto's words reach her ears. I don't blame you for what happened, the boy continued solemnly. It's just that, I know, the jounin cut him off. I understand how you feel and I don't expect for you to ever fully trust me. I just want you to trust me enough to help you through this problem. After that, you can decide whether or not you ever want to see me again. Naruto nodded his head in understanding and then stood from the swing. Alright, just tell me what you need me to do. In response to his cooperation, Kurenai gave out a deep sigh of relief, trying to contain the hidden joy she felt inside, before speaking once more. Okay then Naruto, the first thing I need you to do is to try and remember how you activated your abilities. I need you to repeat everything you did on those 2 nights. Naruto tried to do everything as Kurenai had suggested, but the more he attempted to reenact what happened, the more he felt like he would never be able to do it. The jounin herself just continued to watch on in quiet anticipation as the boy slowly tried to call on the same feelings and emotions that had triggered the attack on his assailants. But she began to realize that he would never be able to forcefully resurface those emotions again. After a few more minutes of failed attempts, the woman began to grow desperate. She knew she had only one choice left, and it wasn't one she wanted to resort to. Kurenai bit the top of her lip and cringed at the thought of what she was about to do, trying to prepare herself for the pain she was about to see in Naruto's eyes. I knew it, she began harshly, gaining the boy's attention. I guess those guys at the orphanage were right about you after all. Maybe you deserve everything that happened to you. Naruto took a frightened step backwards as the bitter words sank into his heart, his eyes instantly filling with panic and grief. The mere sight of his confusion and fear caused Kurenai to yelp under her breath despite herself, but she quickly managed to hide her mistake from the boy's view. She couldn't allow Naruto to see her true feelings just yet, and she had to keep up the act despite how it tore at her heart. But I thought you thought wrong. Kurenai cut the choking boy off. I can't believe Iruka would take on a useless pile of trash like you. I mean, what was he thinking? Naruto's eyes began to flood with tears as the woman's words continued to tear away at his soul, but even then, despite his fear, he couldn't help the anger that began to take hold of him. Don't say that about Iruka-sensei. He's the only one who ever cared about me. You don't know anything. Naruto's sobs grew even louder than before as his cries of defense whispered across the afternoon air. Kurenai noticed a brief flash of gold flicker in his eyes and realized she was getting closer to her goal. She only needed to push him a little bit further. How could that idiot love you? If he's that stupid, then perhaps you two deserve each other after all. Iruka's nothing but a useless, ignorant man who doesn't even. Stop it! Naruto cut her off. Stop saying those things about Iruka-sensei. Suddenly Naruto's eyes were completely enveloped in a shining hue. His once blue orbs now shone a pure, defiant gold and locked into Kurenai's own astonished gaze with their convicting stare. The young woman instantly felt a sudden rush of excruciating pain and grief fill into her entire body thereafter, crippling her completely as her muscles began to collapse under her in agony. She tried desperately to fight against it, raising her trembling hands together to release the genjutsu before she was completely consumed by it. If it wasn't for her jounin endurance to pain, she would have never been able to bear the agony, but even still it took all of her willpower just at all. Her trembling hands slowly clamped together soon afterwards, followed by a desperate cry as she called out in panic. Kai! A sudden surge of chakra erupted throughout the jounin's body following her call, disrupting her own flow of chakra in order to release the genjutsu's hold. But nothing happened and the pain just continued to fill around her. Why can't I? Kurenai's thoughts were abruptly flooded with raw emotions, causing her agonized body to collapse onto one knee despite her efforts to fight against it. She tried to keep herself from falling into unconsciousness altogether, and quickly looked up to see the golden-eyed boy staring back at her, her eyes pleading for him to stop. Naruto, however, seemed to be desperately lost in a trance, completely unaware of what was happening right in front of him. After struggling against the suffocating pain that held her paralyzed, Kurenai tried to call out to him with all her strength, to get him to release his crippling hold. Naruto. Please stop. Suddenly, the boy's eyes returned to their normal blue shade and his mind quickly snapped back into reality. The trembling form of the crippled jounin in front of him caught his panicked gaze soon afterwards, prompting him to mumble in surprise. Kurenai? What's happening to you? However, Kurenai simply couldn't answer. Her body was still held in the dreadful agony that crippled her, and tears were now streaming down her cheeks. Naruto, realizing that he had caused all of this pain, quickly ran up to the woman and threw his arms around her. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do it. I never wanted to see someone in this kind of pain again. At the instant of Naruto's touch, Kurenai's body began to relax again, calming under the emotions that rushed from Naruto's embrace. The young boy began to cry on her shoulders moments later, wallowing in the guilt of causing someone else so much harm. I'm sorry, he continued to mumble over and over. The jounin trapped in his hold couldn't believe what she was hearing in amongst Naruto's sobs. Despite all the pain she just put the boy through, he was still apologizing to her as if he was the one to blame. She quickly moved her recovering arms around his small body and rocked him in her embrace. SSHHH, don't cry, Naruto, it's not your fault. I'm the one that caused all of this. Kurenai then stroked Naruto's back in a similar manner she had seen Iruka do so only moments before, trying to lessen his sobs and ease the guilt she felt flowing out of him. After a few more minutes had passed, she then pulled back from the hug and gained Naruto's eyes. I'm so sorry, Naruto. I didn't mean any of those things I said, but there was just no other way for me to help you. Can you ever forgive me? Naruto could feel Kurenai's honesty flowing into his body, and he knew she was being sincere in her words. He slowly began to lessen his tears and wiped his eyes, before nodding his head in understanding. Although it was painful for him to hear those words, he realized that she was only trying to help him. After receiving the boy's silent response, the jounin stood up to her feet again, trying to shake off the images that reeled through her mind, and grabbed Naruto's quivering hand once more. Come, let's go see your sensei. I'm sure you could use a hug from him as well, and I'll bet he's worried about how you're doing. Naruto gave a teary nod of approval and followed in Kurenai's stead as her hand guided him back the academy hallways. He didn't know why, but the boy suddenly trusted her not to harm him. Somehow he had seen something inside of her when he caught her in his gaze, something that told him that she really did care for him as much as she said. It was the same type of thing he saw when he looked into the eyes of his abusive warden. The two slowly made their way off the field hand in hand while Kurenai went through what had just happened in her mind. Whatever Naruto had attacked her with, she wasn't able to stop it at all, even after forcing chakra into her own body. Only Naruto's touch seemed to break its impossible hold over her. Kurenai had no doubt that if he hadn't intervened, she would have probably also ended up in hospital as well. The jounin was beginning to wonder if it really was, in fact, a genjutsu she had been hit with. She silently promised herself that she would never subject Naruto to that kind of pain again. Now that she had a small clue on his abilities, she was that much closer to discovering Naruto's secret and helping the boy deal with the powers he had deep inside. A new bond of trust forms for Naruto, allowing his heart to share its burden with another caring soul. Now Kurenai moves to uncover the boy's secret and discover what this strange ability actually is. Chapter 7 Nightfall. The last remnants of the warm Konoha sunlight slowly wisped away beyond a glowing horizon, holding in its diminishing gaze the silhouetted figures of three somewhat uncomfortable souls. Naruto's small feet shuffled through the dusty street below him as he walked home with his two defenders at his sides, hiding him from the cruel stares from the villagers around him. Kurenai began to feel the same kind of protective urge flow over her that she knew Iruka felt as well. She wouldn't allow a hand to fall on the boy that she was now growing to understand and accept. This was her vow, her promise, and she would see it through until her last dying breath. The boy in question carefully hid behind the two every time a villager would walk past, wincing in fear as their eyes followed his form. He knew they hated him. He knew that they would try to hurt him if they ever got the chance. He quickly pulled up against Iruka's side and allowed the Chunin's arm to fall over his back. Naruto just needed to feel the comforting emotions coming from his sensei's touch, while allowing its soothing hold to ease his fears. It was the only thing that kept the boy from breaking apart under the cruel stares of those around him. Kurenai looked over the two with a saddened heart, cringing at the fact that the boy had to go through such lengths just to feel safe. It wasn't fair for such a young soul to be condemned to such a fate, and soon the Jounin found herself tensing up inside with a dreadful anger. Iruka himself couldn't help but feel slightly uncomfortable knot form in his stomach as they made their way through the darkening streets. When he saw Naruto and Kurenai walking back into the academy a few minutes earlier, he could see the distress etched on both of their features. The fact that they walked in together hand in hand completely baffled the Chunin as well. What exactly happened out there between the two to create such an unusual situation? The Chunin, however, shrugged off his thoughts on the matter, knowing that he'd have the chance to ask Kurenai later. Right now, he had to concentrate on the boy beside him. It had been a long day for Naruto and was no doubt by now exhausted. As the Chunin looked down at the young blonde boy next to him, an enticing idea suddenly popped into his mind. He decided then and there that he would hold a little dinner in celebration of Naruto passing his exams. He could imagine it already. The glowing smile on Naruto's messy cheeks and the wondrous blue eyes that showed his approval for food. Iruka inwardly giggled at the thought of it, and he knew just what kind of meal the boy would want. He also wanted Kurenai to come as well. He wanted her to see Naruto smile and be happy, to see the glow on his face and the reward it held for one's heart. The only thing she had seen so far was his sadness and fear. She had never experienced the joy that could flow from his grin and the warmth that made one feel inside. Iruka's lifting thoughts were momentarily jarred as they finally arrived outside the small house near the edge of the village. Kurenai looked almost disappointingly over at her two companions, and then smiled in despondence. "So I guess I'll see you two tomorrow then?" The Jounin looked down to Naruto's face as if to gain the boy's approval. She was still afraid that he wouldn't trust her anymore, especially after what happened between them a few moments earlier. Her heart was put at ease, however, when the boy allowed an approving nod followed by his own brief smile. It warmed her heart to know that he was finally beginning to trust her, even if only a little. "Alright then, I'll see you two after school." Just as Kurenai turned to walk away, Iruka called out to her with a small yelp catching in his voice. "Wait, Kurenai." The Jounin immediately stopped in her tracks and turned to face a blushing Iruka. The Chunin had "shoot me" written all over his face, but he still somehow managed to find the words he was looking for. I just wanted to know, well, I was wondering, if you wanted to join us for dinner?" Both Naruto and Kurenai stared at the red-faced Chunin in complete shock, causing him to sweat under the increasing pressure of their gaze. "Why, he continued uneasily. "To celebrate Naruto passing his exam and all." Naruto just rolled his eyes in disbelief. He didn't have to be touching Iruka to know the man was falling apart in his shoes, but even still he could feel the man's unease flowing from his touch. Kurenai, however, just gave off another gentle smile, and then nodded in approval. "Sure thing, I'd love to join you too." That is if it's alright with Naruto. Both of the shinobi stared down at the blonde, waiting for his approval. When he gave it in the form of a grin, Iruka felt his heart begin to relax, slowing down the blood flow that rushed to the Chunin's glowing face. "Great." He promptly walked up to the entrance to his house and opened the door for Kurenai and Naruto to enter inside. Once everyone was through the door, they removed their footwear at the entrance, and then made their way into the comfort of the living room. Iruka prompted the other two to sit down on the sofas and relax while he got the food ready. He quickly disappeared into the kitchen, leaving the other two alone together. Once he was out of view, they both just sat there in an uncomfortable silence, either knowing what to say to one another. Naruto didn't even seem to know how to handle these kinds of awkward situations because soon the boy's face was once again falling into an uncomfortable frown. Kurenai watched with interest as the young boy slowly twiddled his thumbs together, almost seeming to try and find any words to break the deafening silence. It was clearly obvious that the years of solitude in the orphanage had hampered the boy's ability to start a simple conversation, so instead Kurenai spoke up first instead. "So those eyes of yours look really incredible today. I've never seen anything like them before in my entire life." The Jounin's words seemed to immediately spark Naruto's interest because the boy's face quickly shot up to meet her, instantly losing the frown for a more fascinated expression. Really, what did they look like? What did you see? Kurenai giggled at the boy's pleading expression. His face was filled with both wonder and excitement, something that she hadn't seen in Naruto until right now. Well, they shone like pure gold for one thing, the purest gold I've ever seen. They even matched your hair color a little bit more. Naruto's eyes lit up in complete amazement as he tried to imagine what Kurenai described. Wow! That's so cool! I wish I could see what they looked like. Well, Kurenai responded. Once you learn how to control it properly, I guess you could look at your reflection in the mirror and see for yourself. The truth is, the way Naruto's eyes looked were more than what Kurenai could explain at the time. She could see something else when she looked into the boy's golden orbs, something that seemed almost supernatural. She couldn't find the words to describe it, but the Jounin knew that they weren't anything like the other digitsu she had seen before. Before Kurenai could think on it any longer, Iruka made his way back into the room with 3 bowls of food on his tray. He was happy to notice the relaxed and somewhat excited look on Naruto's face as the boy turned to see him. It seemed as though he was growing a lot more comfortable around Kurenai, despite their short time together. The Chunin was beginning to wonder if it had anything to do with what happened at the academy. Well, it's good to see these happy faces, he sighed as he made his way over towards the two. Iruka grinned in satisfaction as he handed out the bowls of food. He knew Naruto would like what they were having, and true to his expectations, the Chunin gained an instant chuckle of excitement from the blonde when the boy realized that they would be eating ramen for dinner tonight. Kurenai herself managed a smile as she watched Naruto gleefully dig into his new favorite food while slurping a barely audible thank you to his sensei. Iruka then sat down himself and began to eat his own steaming meal. There wasn't a single word to be said as the 3 of them sat there in silence, with only Naruto's slurps breaking through the seemingly endless quiet. It was enough for the 2 older shinobi to just watch the boy smiling as he finished off the bowl with little effort. Thanks, Iruka-sensei, Naruto announced gratefully. Your ramen almost tastes as good as Ichiraku's. The man simply nodded his head in response and flashed a warm smile. Of course, it wasn't long before the blonde was downing another fresh helping, happily grinning away as he ate. Kurenai was completely astonished by how much food managed to disappear into such a small body. Is that a part of his bloodline as well? She mused quietly to herself, before giggling at her own personal thoughts. After they had all finished their well-prepared meals, Naruto assisted Iruka in carrying the dishes to the sink and once again helped him wash them in the warm soapy water. Kurenai watched quietly from the doorway as the 2 playfully splashed one another with foam, her face lighting up every time Naruto giggled in happiness with the white bubbles running down his whiskered cheeks. This was a different Naruto to the one she had seen earlier. This boy was happy in the protective comfort of his own home where no cruel eyes could shatter his soul. The Jounin watching could now see just how loving Iruka was around and quietly mused how good of a father he would make for the child. Once the 2 boys were done playing with the foaming water, Iruka helped Naruto dry his hands and then led the boy to his room. Their Jounin guest followed them down the hallway and continued to look on with a heartwarming smile as she watched Iruka tuck Naruto under his blankets. She was almost brought to tears by how easily the blonde found so much happiness in such simple acts of love. The young man that had made it all happen sat quietly next to the boy's bed and stroked his back in a soothing comfort, lulling him into the ever-present grip of sleep. As Naruto's eyes slowly fell closed and his breathing began to steady, the Chunin leaned over to whisper one last time into the boy's ear. Naruto, I'm so proud of you for today. You're a great kid and I'm sure your parents would be happy to see what you've achieved. Naruto yelped at the sound of his sensei's words, his eyes shooting back open to reveal the shimmer of gold that had since enveloped them. He then turned onto his back and looked up to see the loving eyes that stared back at him, before throwing his arms around the Chunin and pulling him down into a rather awkward hug. Thanks Iruka-sensei, thanks for everything. The Chunin then gave Naruto one last squeeze goodnight, and then walked out towards the doorway where Kurenai was silently watching, leaving Naruto to his newfound dreams. Once he stepped outside, he gently closed the door behind him and then looked over to the woman that held him in her stare. You're really good with him, you know, she offered sincerely. I can see why he loves you so much. Iruka began to smile even more at that, walking with Kurenai as the 2 made their way back into the living room. Once they had both sat down again, Iruka began to speak his thoughts. You know, when he first moved in here, he was so happy to finally have a home that he accidentally called me Dad. The dark-haired Chunin chuckled slightly at the memory of what he was explaining, but it was more of an empty chuckle than anything else. I guess the excitement of moving into a new house had really gotten to him. Kurenai, however, simply looked over to the scarred Chunin, regarding him uncomfortably as his face slowly fell back into a frown. He almost seemed disappointed in himself for some short falling on his part. Are you sure what Naruto said was accidental? She inquired carefully. Or are you just afraid of the implications of his words? Iruka flinched in surprise at that, looking over to the red-eyed Jounin as she spoke to him. It's just that I'm not sure I have what it takes to give Naruto the life he deserves. I don't know if I can be a father that he can look up to, one that he can be proud of. In case you haven't noticed, I haven't exactly achieved anything special in my life. Kurenai walked up from her own chair and sat down next to the slouching man. She slowly rested her hand on his shoulder and gained his eyes with her own reassuring gaze. I think you'd make an excellent father. There is no one in this village that can give Naruto a better life than you can. I can see it on his face when he's around you. He is truly happy when he's being held in your arms. You've achieved more than you could possibly imagine. To make a child happy and to love them, if that isn't the pinnacle of one's achievements, then I don't know what is. Iruka blinked his eyes in surprise and then allowed himself to smile. Thanks, I really appreciate it. It's only the truth. Kurenai responded, gaining another blush from the Chunin. Most kids would be ecstatic to have a loving father like you. The two sat there in another moment of awkward silence thereafter, thinking on the words shared between them, until Iruka began to speak once more. So what exactly happened between you and Naruto while I was inside the academy? I mean, when you came back he looked a little bit panicked. You didn't look so great yourself for that matter. Kurenai's face took on a more saddened expression. What she was about to tell Iruka would hold a lot of weight for the Chunin to bear. Iruka, there's something I need to tell you. I know this may upset you, but I only hope you can find it in your heart to understand. The scarred Chunin took a deep, dreaded gulp. He didn't like the sound of where this was going. Today, while we were outside together, I managed to activate Naruto's bloodline. I did it in a terrible way that I know I shouldn't have, and I'm not proud of that fact. I'm sorry. Iruka's expression quickly fell into a frown. You upset him, didn't you? He growled firmly. You hurt him in order to force him into activating it. Kurenai gave a guilty nod, causing Iruka to scowl in disapproval. He then stood up from the chair and began to pace in frustration. I can't believe you would do something like that. I trusted you enough to be alone with him, and this is what you go and do. Do you have any idea what kind of pain he has to deal with, just for you to go and bring all those hurtful emotions up again? Yes, I do actually. Kurenai cut him off, glaring back at the fuming sensei with hardened eyes. Iruka paused in surprise, wondering what the Jounin meant by her words. He then slowly seated himself down on the nearby chair, before calming himself down, and waiting quietly for her to explain. You were right after all. She began, her voice once again growing calm. Naruto's bloodline is a Dijitsu and a powerful one at that. When he looked into my eyes, it was like I could feel all the pain and sadness that he had accumulated inside. Tears then began to form in the Jounin's eyes as she desperately tried to recount what she had experienced. It was like I was Naruto. It felt like I was in his battered body, feeling all of his pain and grief. I could see all the hateful eyes around me, staring at me with all the cruelty they could muster, and when Iruka quickly moved over to sit next to the sobbing woman, placing his hand on her shoulder in comfort. When they started beating him, it was like I was the one being hurt. Every single blow, every curse they spat, and all the tears he cried, I felt it all. I don't think I could ever forget the memories of what I experienced. It was all just too terrible for words to describe. Kurenai began to break down in Iruka's arms, crying in his shoulders as the pain of those awful memories flowed through her mind. She couldn't understand how a young boy like Naruto had survived so long after all that torture, how he still managed a glowing smile even though those memories haunted his soul. How could he live with the same pain that had brought a Jounin to her knees in tears in a matter of seconds? After a few minutes of quiet sobbing, Kurenai eventually pulled out Iruka's arms and then wiped away her tears. They both sat in complete silence for a while, staring into each other's eyes, before Iruka finally began to speak again, this time in a near whisper. So what was it like? Kurenai looked over to the scarred Chunin in confusion, her eyes still recovering from the tears she shed. His eyes, I mean. I've seen them change every now and again. They keep flashing gold whenever he gets excited or upset. What did you see, Kurenai? The said woman tried to think about her answer. How could she explain something she didn't fully understand herself? The words just came out in the only way she could form them. His eyes, they were beautiful. She spoke softly, her thoughts lingering on the breathtaking gaze that had momentarily stolen her soul. I've never seen anything like it before. When he looked at me, it was like staring into the gaze of heaven itself. Of course, I never really had much time to look properly, because soon after that all hell broke loose. Iruka nodded in understanding, trying to picture everything that she was describing. So, was it a genjutsu that he used on you? Kurenai shook her head. No, I don't think so. All of my experiences with genjutsu so far tell me that this definitely wasn't one. Normally, a genjutsu disrupts a person's chakra pathways, manipulating its flow to the brain in order to cause the person's mind to start hallucinating. What they see and feel when under those effects are all just illusions that may cause psychological damage, but otherwise have no actual physical effect on the body. This, however, was completely different. Different how? Iruka asked curiously, trying to coerce the Jounin into continuing. Well, when someone is caught in a genjutsu, they should be able to release it by forcing chakra through their bodies in order to disrupt the illusion or have someone else do the same. When I tried that, it was like it had no effect at all. Whatever this attack was, it wasn't affecting my chakra flow in any noticeable way, but it wasn't completely physical either. Whatever pain I was feeling, whatever emotions flowed through my body, it was all definitely real. This was no illusion or genjutsu, and I'm not even sure if there is anything I can classify it as at this point in time. Iruka tried to absorb everything that Kurenai was telling him, but she looked just as confused about it as he felt. The closer they seemed to be getting to the answers of Naruto's bloodline, the more elusive the mystery became. After Kurenai had explained everything she knew, Iruka slowly stood from his seat and closed his eyes and thought, we'll have to spend more time together with Naruto if we're ever going to figure this out. I'll inform the Hokage of our progress as soon as possible. In the meantime, I'd like you to continue your investigation into the effects of Naruto's Dijutsu. You know more about its capabilities than anyone else at this point in time. Kurenai looked up in surprise. You mean you're still going to allow me to go near him after everything I did? Iruka slowly nodded in confirmation. Although I don't like the way you handled things, I do understand you were only trying to help Naruto, and besides, he seems to trust you as well, and that counts for a lot in my books. Kurenai then stood up as well and gave a grateful nod to the Chunin. Thanks, Iruka. I promise I won't disappoint you or Naruto. I'll head up to the library tomorrow morning. Maybe they'll have some information on these eyes of Naruto's. After that I'll come over to the academy, and we can continue our evaluation. The Chunin gave his approval, to which Kurenai gave out a relieved sigh. Well then I guess I should be going home now. We'll need our rest for tomorrow if we're to be at our best. The Jounin finished, before turning to walk over to the door. However, before she could get far, Iruka placed his hand on her shoulder, stopping her in her tracks. Wait, Kurenai, it's getting very late outside and we've had a very long day. After what happened to you, I don't feel comfortable leaving you home alone. I think it would be better if you slept here tonight. I have a spare bedroom that you can use if you like. Kurenai smiled and then turned to face Iruka again. She really was tired, and the Chunin did have a point. Sure thing, that sounds great. Iruka couldn't help but smile in light of her response. He then led the exhausted Jounin over to her room and then, after making sure she was comfortable, slowly made his way to his own. The tired Chunin quickly flopped into the warm embrace of his bed soon afterwards, allowing his thoughts to wander once more as they usually did while he lay there each night. The new academy training would be starting tomorrow, and he had to help Naruto catch up to the rest of his class. He couldn't break his promise to the blonde boy that had now become like a son to him. They had to gain a handle on this Dijutsu he was displaying, otherwise the long-term consequences may be severe. What if Naruto finds a legendary summoning contract? And thanks for watching my video till the end. If you enjoy this content, then do consider subscribing to my channel, and leave a like if you guys need the next part. Comment down, and thanks for watching the video, and see you guys in the next video.